Hello and welcome to Melee's Turnwheel, the series that takes a retroactive look at the Fire Emblem series chapter by chapter. I'm your host, I'm main Melee Kirby, and today we're taking it back to chapters 1 through 3 of Fire Emblem Thracia 776. Sorry it's been so long since the last episode went out. Things have been pretty hectic for me. But yeah, we are here in Thracia 776. I'm very excited because this is a game that, if nothing else, is extremely fun to talk about. It's one of the most unique games in the series, and I hope to show that off as we go through the game and talk about it chapter by chapter. Out of all the games in the series that we are talking about on this show, this is the one I would say that I have the least experience with. I've only beaten it twice, which is a low number for me. Actually, I think Revelation I've only beaten once. So Revelation might be a little bit lower. But it was definitely the last game in the series that I played that I've beaten. It was the last game that I completed from the series, and it's really not hard to see why. I mean, on top of it just being like a really daunting experience because of how weird and unique and archaic, frankly, some of these mechanics are, which we'll talk about more later, kind of similar to FE4 in a way because FE4 had a similar problem. But the biggest issue is that until fairly recently, this game just didn't have a great way to be played in English. It was in a very long state of having like partial translation patches, but a full one that translated the entire game and did it well didn't come out until I don't remember. I want to say like 2019, 2018, something like that. I'll double check though. Yeah, so I was right. 2019 is when the first full translation patch of this game came out, at least the first like good one. The previous ones were all kind of janky. One of them translated the story, but it wasn't very good, frankly. I mean, I'm sorry. I don't mean to shit on the hard work of the people who made that patch. But I mean, it was an old patch, and it needed to be updated for sure. And then even then, first of all, the full story wasn't even translated. There were parts that was in Japanese still, or in like gobbledygook word salad text. And the bigger problem with that one is that the menus were completely unreadable. So you needed a guide to navigate the menus or just memorize where everything was, which is what I did. So that was the one that I actually played on for the first time. Eventually, I got tired of waiting in like 2017 or 2018. And I was like, fuck it, I'm just going to play it with the shitty translation patch. After that, we got one that was a menu translation. So you could play the game completely normally in Japanese, but the menus were translated into English. So you wouldn't be able to understand the story, but you would still be able to like actually play the game and experience the gameplay, which is good. But it wasn't really what I want because I wanted to experience the story as well. So it was a while. Eventually, we did get Project Exile in 2019. To my knowledge, the first like full good translation patch that combines both story and the menus. Now, there has been some criticism leveled at Project Exile. First of all, the font that it uses is really weird and kind of hard to read at times. I personally don't mind, but I know that that was a complaint a lot of people had when it first came out, is like, why is this font so hard to read? Not really a problem for me. I'm able to understand everything just fine, but it was definitely an odd choice. So I don't have any problems understanding why people were bothered by that. But I think the bigger concern that a lot of people had was that it took a lot of liberties in its translation. And this isn't like inherently bad. I don't think a lot of official localizations do this as well, but it wasn't what I think most people wanted or expected from a fan translation. And I don't know any specific examples, so I can't give you one, but I do know that this was like a very common, and still is today, a very common issue that people have with the Project Exile patch is that it puts in a lot of stuff that's not like in the original Japanese script. I don't think it changes anything like huge. I think it's mostly just flavor stuff, but sometimes flavor stuff can give you an impression of a character that wasn't intended in the original translation or the original script. So it's still important, and I understand why people were bothered by it. In response to this, I believe a member of the Project Exile staff went on to create a their own translation patch, or it was basically like a cleanup patch, more or less. Like it was using Project Exile as a base, but just cleaning up some of the mistakes. And so I mean, some there are just also some mistakes in Project Exile, like there are in any translation patch, typos, mistranslation, stuff like that. But I think a big goal of that one was to make it a bit more faithful to the original. That came out, and I think there was some controversy where like the Project Exile developer kind of was talking shit about the cleanup patch was called Lil Manster. I don't know why it's called that, but it's called that. And I think that there was some drama around that. I don't really know. That's not the sort of thing that I care about or that I want to talk about. It's a kind of a mess. This game has had a very storied and complex history with its translations, and I'm just glad that if anything, now people have options, which 5 years ago was like unthinkable. If you wanted to play Thracia and have any fathom of an idea what was going on, you needed to play a half-finished story translation with a menu guide, right? Like, and then now we have like you have the Project Exile, and then if you want a little bit more faithful of a recreation, you can go to Little Manster. So that's really cool, and I'm really glad that this is the state that the game ended up in. And I'm sure that just with any translation patch, there will be more fully developed ones later on. I mean, there are still updated translation patches coming out for the like some of the more thoroughly translated games, ones with long history of translation patches like FE6 and FE12. Those translation patches are getting updated all the time. But as of right now, it's pretty much just those two as the main big ones. In terms of what I'm using, because I know this is going to have an effect on the script and as a result, my discussion of the story. So it is important. And I went for Project Exile for no real reason, really. I actually forgot that Little Manster existed. So Project Exile was kind of what I had in my brain as the Thracia translation patch. And then I played like the first few chapters with Project Exile, and then I remembered Little Manster existed, and I was like, well, I could I could play through the first few maps again with Little Manster. It wouldn't have been that big of a deal. But also, I got some good level ups. Some of my characters got movement level ups, which we'll talk about later. So I decided to just stick with Project Exile. If that's something that really you think is just not good, because I know a lot of people that just think that Project Exile is bad straight up. Personally, I disagree. I think that it's fine. I think taking liberties with the translation is okay. And again, it's something that official localizations do all the time. So I really don't think it's that big of a deal. I'm gonna use Project Exile, and then if you hear me say something that's like that's not that's a Project Exile creation. It's like it was created in Project Exile and is not in the original script or Little Manster. Feel free to point it out because I want to hear about that stuff. I want to get as thorough of an understanding of this game as possible. I'm using the script on the wiki, which is like slightly different from Project Exile, which makes me think maybe that uses Little Manster, which means that I am mostly going to be referencing the Little Manster script anyway because I take notes off of the in-game script, but then I often need to go back and refresh my memory using the wiki script. So I don't know. If that's what it is, then yeah, it's going to be primarily the Little Manster anyway. So that's enough about the translation stuff. Let's talk about the game itself. Thracia is a lot of people's last game in the franchise. I can say it was definitely my last, aside from maybe the NES ones. I think this is the game that probably the least amount of people have played. That's not based on like sales figures or anything, although I think it is also the least selling game in the series because it came out in I want to say 1998, the same year as Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64. It was no, I think it was 1999, maybe. I don't know. Let me check. 1999, September 19. Oh, we actually just passed the anniversary a couple weeks ago. So happy anniversary, Thracia, or happy birthday, I guess. Man, that would have been cool to get this episode out on September 1st, huh? Whatever. But yeah, I'm willing to bet that if there is a game in the series that you have not played, it's probably this one. And that's for a lot of reasons. I think that similar to FE4, this game has a lot of mechanics and a lot of like a reputation of being really archaic and really hard to get into. Part of that is very well earned, just like with FE4, but I think FE5 especially really earns that title of being what people would call Nintendo hard. In other words, it's not hard if you like know what you're doing. Like it's not hard based on like it takes skill to execute. It's hard because when you're playing blind, it throws a lot of stuff at you that is just unfair. And I'm letting my biases show a little. I'm trying to be as neutral as possible in this opening blurb because I'm gonna spend a lot of time talking about Thracia and the various things I do not like about Thracia and the various things I do like about Thracia. But I think it is a widely accepted opinion that Thracia at times can be very unfair if you are not playing with a guide. Which brings me actually to something that I said in one of the FE4 episodes, I think the very first FE4 episode, which is that I highly recommend that you play this game with a guide. I know that that is not conventional wisdom. I know you only get a chance to play a game blind once, and that is not something that I suggest lightly because I understand that you will never get that experience back. Please trust me, it is bullshit how much this game throws at you that is completely asinine if you do not already know that it's coming. It's completely asinine sometimes, even if you do know it's coming. Sorry, I'm going to turn down, I'm going to make it a little quieter because my audio, oh, this might be too quiet. My audio is peaking a lot, so I'm going to try to keep it a little bit lower so that I don't blow your eardrums out every other sentence. Okay, that should be better. Where was I? Yes, so this game has a reputation for being unfair, understandable. In a lot of instances, I completely agree, and I recommend that you play it with a guide. If you are of the opinion that you want to experience every game blind your first time through, absolutely. I'm not saying you have to. I'm not even saying that you have to have a good time. I just personally feel that it is the best way to gain appreciation of Thracia because I can tell you that if I was not there were times where I almost rage quit this game with a guide. And if I did not have a guide, I would not have made it past chapter 4. I would never have like given this game enough of a chance to impress me past chapter 4. And that is just my own personal experience with this game. I guess I'm kind of dipping into this now anyway, but the next thing I wanted to talk about is just how I feel about this game personally and how I am hoping that that changes over the course of these episodes. So I've made it no secret. I've tried to kind of like keep it on the DL, but it's slipped out every now and again. I do not like Thracia at all. I it is without a hint of I guess exaggeration isn't the right word because it's not going to sound like an exaggeration, but being completely genuine, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It is my least favorite game in the series that we are talking about on this podcast. I would still say that Gaiden is worse. It is I enjoyed playing Gaiden less than I enjoyed playing Thracia. But we're not talking about Gaiden. Gaiden is not a part of this podcast, so I stand by what I just said. And yes, that means that I would personally rank Thracia below Awakening, Birthright, Revelation, all of these games that people say are terrible and are regarded as some of the worst games, not just in the series, but some of the worst strategy RPGs ever made. I still found them more enjoyable than Thracia. And I think that like I'm not trying to say that this game is bad and that if you like it you're a bad person or anything like that. I'm just trying to really hammer this in for the sake of transparency that if you're coming to this with a expecting an unbiased, completely neutral uh, review, or I mean, I don't think I've ever advertised this as a neutral review podcast, but basically what I'm saying is I have negative opinions about this game going in, and if that's something that's going to frustrate you, I feel like you should be aware of that now because I'm not fond of this game, especially the beginning of the game. I think that and the end of the game. I think the middle of the game is actually pretty good. It has some like really solid chapters from like the range of like like roughly between chapter 12 and chapter 20 is kind of where I'm like vibing with this game, which is not a small amount of the game, you know? Like I'm not trying to say that this game has nothing of value to offer because there are some really, really good maps. One of my favorite maps in the series, like easy top 5 favorite maps in the series, is chapter 19, which we'll talk about obviously when we get there, but it is an excellent map that incorporates the story into the gameplay better than any other map in the series, in my opinion. All this is to say that I kind of enjoy this game. It's a Fire Emblem game. I really like Fire Emblem. It's my favorite franchise. So even the least favorite game, again, Gaiden kind of the exception, but even my least favorite game in the series is still going to give me some level of enjoyment because I just enjoy the core gameplay loop that much. But there's a lot I don't like about this game, and there's a lot that's going to frustrate me, and there's a lot that I'm going to complain about, and so be prepared for that. And if you're a Thracia fan, I encourage you, please debate me. Please tell me, your opinions and explain why you think I'm not giving the game enough credit. And I will be happy to listen. I might not agree with you, but I will be respectful and I will hear you out for sure. Because there are people I have friends who I like and care about very much that love this game. So I'm not dismissing it out of hand. It's just how I feel, and I wanted to be transparent about that at the start. So I think that is all the preamble out of the way. Oh, I should mention that I'm playing on Paragon mode, which is a secret kind of easy mode. I mentioned this last episode, but in both Gaiden and Thracia, my two least favorite games in the series, weirdly enough, but that's just a coincidence, have a Paragon mode, which is basically you input a cheat code on the title screen or on the file select screen, and that'll give you an option to start the game in Paragon mode, which exactly what it sounds like gives every character the Paragon ability. In other words, double the experience. And this does stack with actual Paragon, which didn't exist in Gaiden, but does in Thracia. So characters with Paragon get times 4 experience instead of the usual times 2. It's really, really nice. In a game that is frustrating at times, it is really nice to have that constant Skinner's box effect of constantly being rewarded, constantly getting those level ups. You can get an insane amount of experience just from like engaging in battle in this game, which helps for sure mitigate some of the shittiness at times. This game is really based, we'll see more of this, but this game is really based around the freedom of being able to use who you want to use and build your army in a very like free form way. You are not restricted at all in who you're able to use. Um, Unlike in some games like FE12, where even on like the lower difficulties, some characters are prohibitively difficult to use, which can be fun. Like using FE6 Sophia is more satisfying because it's difficult. So I'm not saying that this is the best philosophy for every game, but it is a different philosophy than some of those later games where if you try to use someone like Roshea, or no, Violent, I think it was. In FE12, I was playing hard mode on FE12 once, and Violent is a late game recruit. This is hard mode, so this is not like usual hard mode. Hard mode in this game is the second lowest difficulty in FE12. It is the only one below it is normal mode. So in hard mode, the enemies are still fairly weak. Violent gets one rounded by generic enemies in his joining map on the second lowest difficulty in the game. It is ridiculous, but there's nothing like that here. You are able to use everyone. You're always able to use everyone, but it's pretty easy to use everyone, and you don't really feel like you're handicapping yourself by using a bad unit to the extent that you would be in a game like FE12, FE6, even FE11, sometimes Tellius, games like that. Radiant Dawn more so than Path of Radiance, but you get what I'm trying to say. And then Paragon mode just makes that even more so. You know, it's you're really able to grind up bad units. Every character has the same stat caps, and it's relatively easy to get them up to those stat caps. So you're never really going to be like, wow, this unit just can't keep up with my other units, because eventually everyone's going to plateau and be the same level of excellent across the board for the most part. Okay, so we are almost 25 minutes in, and we haven't even started the actual game yet. So we're going to go ahead and start talking about Thracia 776, beginning with Chapter 1, The Warrior of Fianna. You know, I haven't really figured out how I'm going to do this transition, because in FE4, every game had its own map, or every map had its own theme, so I could just put the map theme at the beginning of every map. Now I'm doing groups of chapters, and there's like way fewer map themes, so I might just put generic Thracia music there. I don't know. Anyway, chapter 1 starts off. Actually, I lied. We're gonna talk a little bit about the not the prologue, but like the opening's intro cinematic, because that's relevant. Very briefly, it just kind of recaps what happened at the end of Gen 1, but also the immediate aftermath as it applies to Leinster, which is where Quan is from. Quan and Leaf, if you remember from FE4, kind of these secondary. I wouldn't call them secondary protagonists. They weren't very important in FE4, but they were around, and they had good relationships with Sigurd and Selef. Essentially, what is explained is that after the fall of Sigurd and the Battle of Valhalla, Quan was also caught up in the crossfire, and this basically tore everything apart. Quan, along with about half of the Leinster Knights, were killed, which left Leinster very, very low on its defenses. It still took them a while. It took them a few years, I believe, but eventually Juan's father was killed, and the main castle of Leinster was captured by Thracia. We know what happens after that is that Bloom comes in and takes it back from Thracia, but at the time it's occupied by Thracia, and Finn manages to escape with a young Prince Leaf in tow, and the two of them live on the run for about 13 years, which places Leaf. Well, I mean the year is 776, if you couldn't tell by the title of the game, but it places Leaf at about 16 to 17 years old, and that's the intro cinematic. Now, actual chapter 1 starts with a little bit of a recap of that. It just explains how Leaf managed to escape Leinster with the help of Finn, alongside Nana, who is Lachesis' daughter. Canonically, she exists. Well, the substitutes in FE4 are all real people that exist regardless of whether or not the moms in that game have kids. It's just a matter of like, do you actually see them or not? So GN, who's Nana's substitute, is still alive and still exists and still is doing things, I assume. But canonically, Nana is the one that is with Leaf and Finn for the majority of this game and into like FE4 Chapter 7. So they lived on the run from the Grandvale Empire and made their way from town to town, never staying in one place for too long. They did settle down for a little bit in a place called Tara, which is a place that's going to be important later. Tahra. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Tara. Yeah, so that's going to be relevant later. But eventually they left there as well and made their way to a small coastal town named Fianna. Fianna has a small mercenary militia kind of group led by a swordswoman named Avel, and they were welcomed with open arms. And the game just restates again, in case it wasn't made clear in the title, that the year is 776. The narration then cuts to the actual chapter proper, where we see Empire troops have figured out that Leaf is living here and are looking for him. They talk about being cruel and torturing the villagers to get them to talk, and This really just, cements how evil they are. But it seems like Leaf really is not there because he is out with Avil and the Free Blades. And they were off fighting some bandits and are on their way back. The Empire does not leave empty handed, though, because they managed to capture Nana and a girl named Marita, who is Avel's daughter. And the villain, who at this point I don't believe that we know his name is Raedric yet, but his name is Raedric, he leaves with them and leaves the Empire there to kind of capture Leaf when he returns. When they get back, Avel and Leaf and Finn and all of them realize what's going on, and Avel tries to insist that Leaf get away, but Leaf decides that he wants to stand and fight, basically saying, I've been running this whole time, and it's time that I finally took a stand, and, I'm going to have to do it eventually. It might as well be now, that sort of thing. Avel says if Finn's cool with it, then I'm cool with it, and Finn agrees because, I mean, at the end of the day, Finn does work for Leaf, not the other way around. So as much as Finn has been taking care of him and trying to protect him, Leaf is his boss essentially. So he can't, he's like, if this is what he wants, then I'm gonna support him. So they agree to all fight together, and the game gives us a little soft tutorial on capturing, which is a new mechanic that we'll talk about in a minute. But Avel essentially says that if you're able to make the enemy give up their weapons, you can just let them go and they'll run away. It's a nice in-universe explanation for what's going on because it also says that Avel wants them to hold back a little bit and try to capture some of the Empire soldiers, which explains the stat handicap. It's not just arbitrary; it's the fact that they're literally holding back so that they don't kill them by accident. And that's where the map starts. Now, we have a lot of characters to talk about right away, and we get a few more later on, so I'm just going to get right into it. Leaf is the main character of this game, which is really cool. He was a relatively important part of the last game, but we never really got to see him, like his story. We knew a little bit about what happened, and we were invested in him because Quan was a really cool character, and we liked to see him like living up to Quan's legacy. Some of the stuff with Altena was important. It's not like he was a nobody in FE4, but he definitely was more of a supporting character than a main lead in the same way that Seliph, obviously, but then also characters like Julia or Deirdre in Gen 1. He definitely was not quite on that level. Here, though, he is the main lord, which is great because I definitely think that there's a story to tell. I mean, obviously there is because we're playing it right now, but I'm really glad that they saw Leaf and FE4 and Kaga or whoever was like, we can continue this story. We can tell more about Leaf's story because there was a lot there to explore, and I'm glad that they capitalized on it. Leaf is a cool character. We're going to talk a lot about him over the course of the game, obviously, because he's the main character. But just suffice it to say that I remember really liking him. He's one of the best lords in the series, if not the best. So I'm excited to see how that goes. Although, again, in FE4, I was kind of surprised by my opinions on Sigurd and Seliph. So I might be surprised. Again, I don't know. In terms of gameplay, Leaf is a weird unit. He has a unique weapon. This is actually something that a ton of characters have in this game, is a personal weapon that only they can use, and most of them are really, really, really good and broken. And the thing that separates the good characters from the not as good characters in this game, especially when I talked about, eventually everyone kind of plateaus and it's really easy to make bad characters good. So what really sets certain characters apart from others are the unique weapons that they have access to. In this game, a lot of characters have unique weapons. Finn has one. We'll talk about that in a minute. I think that's it for this chapter. But and then obviously Leaf. He has the Light Brand, which is a 1-2 range. It works similarly to how it does in FE4, right? In like its basics, it's a 1-2 range weapon that can cast magic attacks at range. Its exact stats are not the same, obviously, but it gives him like a luck bonus, I think, and is really good. Like it's fantastic. It cannot be repaired, and this is something that's like repairing is not a series staple. But if you started with FE4, then it's kind of a bit jarring to see this and be like, oh yeah, okay, I can just spam this and then repair it later. Nope. I mean, you can repair with the hammer and staff, but like in most games, but once you use up an item, most of the time it's just going to be gone. It does stay in your inventory, and you just have to either get rid of it or store it or repair it with the hammer and staff, which is good because like you don't have to worry about not using it because like if you use it all the way, it won't disappear from your inventory. So that is pretty nice. It allows him to do magic damage at range, which is really good because most characters have really bad res, and just being able to attack from range is really nice. He also has a unique situation coming up in a few chapters where basically he will be one of the only characters that we have access to for a short portion of the game. And most of the other characters that we have access to are quite bad, or at the very least, frail and can't stand up to a lot of enemies. So putting a lot of emphasis on training Leaf here is generally considered a good idea. And as a result, he's considered by many to be one of the best characters in the game in terms of gameplay. I don't know how well I agree with that because to me it feels more like if you say that a character is like you need to pump a character full of experience because of necessity, I'm not sure if that makes them a good character or if that just means that the game kind of forces you to train them. Um, so, I mean, he starts off pretty bad. Like, his stats are mediocre. The Light Brand, I believe, weighs him down by quite a bit, and then he can't do a lot of damage with the Iron Sword. He's not very good. But you get some early stat boosters that are usually a good idea to give to him, because, again, he's one of the best characters we're going to have coming up shortly in a few chapters. Tomato, tomato, really. I mean, either way, you're going to use him and you're going to train him and you're going to make him really good because whether that's because you think he's a good unit or whether because you have to survive the upcoming chapters, it really doesn't make a difference because at the end of the day, you're going to come away with a Leaf that's pretty damn good. So that's the important part. He's a good unit for sure. I don't know if he's one of the best in the game, but he is not bad by any means. Finn, good old Finn, is our second returning character from FE4. I've already talked a lot about Finn and why I think he's such a good character, and I'm not going to repeat too much of that here because not only is, I've already said a lot of it, but also we get to see a lot more of him in this game as well. So anything that I feel compelled to talk about, I will bring up. It's not like, we're not talking about Halvin, who has like 4 lines to make an impression, right? Finn is going to be important for the whole game, so I won't spend too much time talking about him here in terms of his character. In fact, I'm not going to spend any time at all talking about his character, other than that, it is good. And it was good in FE4, it's still good here. As a unit, in terms of gameplay, he is very, very, very good. He is he's another character with a unique weapon, like I said, the Brave Lance. You get all the Brave weapons in this game. You get one of each, I believe, a Brave sword, bow, axe, and lance. Finn's is the only one that is unique to him specifically. All the other ones you can use on any character that can use that weapon type, but Finn is the only character capable of using the Brave Lance, which gives him a unique niche. I mean, the weapon triangle isn't very important in this game, so it's not like you're gonna see a guy with a sword and it's like, damn, I can't use the Brave Sword on that guy. I really need the advantage that the Brave Lance gives me, right? Like that's not gonna happen probably. But it's something, right? And of course, the Brave Lance is just really, really good in general. Finn is on a horse, which gives you a whole slew of advantages in this game compared to other games in the series. Being on horseback is not as important in this game as it was in FE4 for obvious reasons. The maps are much more scaled down, are much more akin to what you would see in earlier games and in, of course, later games. They're not huge. So it's not as imperative that every character that you use be on a horse. So in that sense, he's not as advantaged as he was in FE4. But don't you worry, they came up with a whole bunch of other ways to make horses broken in this game. They did try to balance it a little bit by making horses have to dismount indoors, which is a mechanic that's come up a couple times. I think this is the last time we see it. I'm pretty sure the only other time was in FE3 where horses have to dismount indoors. Dismounting was in FE4. I don't know if I ever mentioned this, but Seliph could dismount. You never ever had a reason to have Seliph dismount, but he could do it. In this game, though, if you want a horseback unit to fight indoors, you do have to take them off their horse, which not only makes them obviously a lot, their mobility goes down by quite a bit, but also they can't use their main weapon type anymore. They can only use swords. So I guess if the character's main weapon type is swords, then yeah, they can still be useful. But you're running around with Finn. He's got like B lances or whatever, and you're using Brave Lance, Silver Lance, Master Lance, whatever. And then you get to indoors, and he has to run around with a dinky iron sword. You're probably not going to want to use him. So it makes it a little bit balanced. I think it's still bad in a different way. Like it just heavily restricts who you're able to use and makes it so that he's borderline dead weight for any map where you're primarily indoors. I'm not a fan of that, but I appreciate the effort to make horses a little bit less overpowered. Instead, they're overpowered because you can capture really easily with them. Finn in particular is really good at capturing because of the Brave Lance. Again, more on capturing later, but just know that Finn is really good at it because of the Brave Lance, but then also because he's on a horse. Any horseback unit in this game really has a is really great at capturing, and is also immune to getting captured themselves, which is great. Okay, let's get into the original characters. Orson and Halvin are both I mean, in terms of their character, they're both pretty much the same. They're generic axe bros. You see this trope a lot. Didn't come up in FE4, but it does come up in just about every other game, where you have two characters, both use axes, and then one of them's like they have like differing personalities. Basically, it's kind of like the Christmas Calves. Actually, I think these guys are a lot more similar to the Christmas Cav like character archetype than the actual Christmas Calves in this game, which we'll see later, much later. We don't get them until like chapter 9, I think. One of them is really laid back and kind of more calm under pressure. In this case, Halvin. Orson is a lot more aggressive, a lot more intense, and as a result, is usually the one that people talk about more often because he actually has a personality, whereas Halvin's whole thing is that he's kind of quiet. Neither of them are really anything special in terms of their character, in my opinion. Orson has a little bit of a romance subplot, I guess, with one of the characters we're going to see in just a minute, but neither of them are any, they're not really like a cut above anyone like Board and Cord or who's another good example, um, like Lot and Wade, Dorcas and Bartray, stuff like that. I mean, yeah, that's actually a perfect example. They're basically just Halvin and Orson are just Dorcas and Bartray, respectively. That's really the best comparison I can think of. In terms of gameplay, they are completely different, and by that I mean Halvin's pretty mediocre. He's fine. He's not good. He's not bad. Orson is probably like top 5 units in the game. Both of them have events in this village, in this first chapter, where there are two houses that can only be visited by one of them. Orson has one village, Halvin has one village. Halvin's village gives him the Brave Axe, which, as I just mentioned, is not exclusive to him. Anyone who can use axes can use the Brave Axe, and Halvin is certainly not the best user of the Brave Axe. He's a good user of the Brave Axe because the Brave Axe itself is so good, but he's like, you're not going to bring Halvin just to use the Brave Axe, right? If you want to use Halvin, then sure, use the Brave Axe on him. But like there are so many better options essentially. Orson's village gives him the so they changed the name a bunch. Right now, I believe it is called the Fudge. The Fudj, I believe, is what they have named it now. In some instances, it's just called Orson's Hatchet. But I know it, and I believe most people know it as the Poochie. Uh, it's iconic. It's one of the most iconic things about this game. Actually, is Orson's Poochie. It is basically a killer hand axe, and it has 30 crit and is, I believe, 30, maybe like 25 or something. I don't know, but roughly that amount of crit. Can attack at range, and this is the important part: exclusive to Orson. No other character can use it. I don't know why they didn't make the Brave Axe exclusive to Halvin. Doesn't make any sense to me. But I guess they just really wanted everyone to use the Brave Axe. But Orson gets his own personal weapon. That's great. Um, this synergizes really well with his personal skills. Skills are a thing that come back in this game. Most of the time, it's not going to be like super important. Like Finn's is Miracle. Miracle's not that big of a deal. I'll bring it up if it's like relevant, but most of the time I'm just gonna kind of like casually mention them or maybe not mention them at all. I don't know. Orson's skill is Wrath, and Wrath works differently in this game than it does in other games. In most games, Wrath gives you a crit boost when you are low on health, basically. More or less, that's what it does. In this game, it is uh, a guaranteed crit if you are attacked first. So if an enemy attacks you and then you strike back and you hit, it will be a crit 100% of the time. Pretty cool. The Pooji also has a high crit chance. So it's very likely that you're going to crit twice in one round of combat when you are attacked first. Hell, it's likely that you're going to be attacked, that you're going to crit twice in combat, even if you are attacked first. There's another element of this that is interesting as well, and that is the hidden stat known as the pursuit critical coefficient or the follow up critical coefficient, depending on what translation you use. This has been a bit of a meme in the community because follow up critical coefficient, of course, shortens to fuck, but I know it better as pursuit critical coefficient, so I'm going to be calling it PCC for the most part. But I might call it fuck if I want to, you know, if I want to throw in a curveball every now and again. Orson's PCC is 3, which is, I guess I should explain what it does first. The PCC is a number that your crit is multiplied by if you do a second attack. This applies both when you're attacking and when you're being attacked. So, for example, if you have a pursuit critical coefficient of 3, like Orson does, and you have a 30 crit weapon, let's just say you have 30 crit, you attack once with 30 crit, you get attacked back, and then if you attack a second time, you have a 90% chance to crit, which is ridiculous for obvious reasons. And of course, it is really easy to see why that is broken, because not only does Orson have a guaranteed crit on his first attack when he's attacked first, but on his second attack, it has like a 95 or something percent chance to crit as well. So he's going to be critting almost every single attack on enemy phase. It's absolutely insane. Orson is top 5 units in the game for sure. He's on foot, which is a little bit problematic in some of the maps because horses are still really good. Spoilers, they didn't make horses not good. They just made it more annoying to use them sometimes. But he's still he's a really really good unit. By far the best foot unit in the game, probably. Halvin doesn't have anything like that. Halvin has Vantage, which does pair well with the Brave Axe, because you're going to be getting attacked. Vantage again is 100% proc rate, and it lets you go first when you are attacked on enemy phase. So there's a lot of instances where Halvin is going to be attacked, and he'll be able to kill with the Brave Axe before the other person's able to actually connect with them. Not good enough. He's fine. He's not a bad unit. He's just okay. Whereas Orson is just so good, it's like, I don't know why they gave Orson so much favoritism while giving Halvin nothing at all. Orson is also in Heroes, whereas Halvin isn't. I just feel like they really didn't care about Halvin, but for some reason Orson, they were like, yeah, we gotta juice this guy up something fierce. Avel. Alright. Avel is, so you're gonna notice pretty quickly, if you didn't notice right away, and you're gonna notice pretty early on, she looks very familiar, and that is because Avel is actually a character named Brigid, who was in FE4 and is one of the surviving members of Sigurd's army. There were a few, only a couple that we actually saw. Lewin, obviously, in the last game, like Finn and Oifi and Shannon were not there, so they don't really count. And then we hear about like Lachesis survived, but then died later. Lana survived, or not Lana. Adine survived. We never saw her. I think Sylvia survived, but died in Darna or something like that. So a lot of characters survive, but this is one of the few that we actually see their life after the fact. Avel has, I believe, lost all of her memories. I cannot remember if this is true or not. I'm pretty confident that she does not remember who she is. And neither does Finn, which seems weird at first because they did meet, but then you also have to remember that um, they were together for like a few like turns at most. Finn and Bridget are only on your team together for the last stretch of chapter 3 because you get her right at the end of chapter 3 and then Finn leaves at the very beginning of chapter 4. So it's pretty understandable why he wouldn't recognize her after seeing her once and then not seeing her again for 15 years. It's pretty understandable. I don't really remember Avel's character in this game. I kind of just want to talk about her as Bridget, but I've already talked about her as Bridget. Pretty forgettable as Bridget too, to be honest, but certainly not bad. And then I think she gets a lot more screen time and a lot more time to show off as Avel. She's very capable, very good natured, and really wants to protect Leaf. Again, not any reason to think that it's like because of a connection to Quan. Again, she met Quan maybe once, so I don't think she would have any reason to like know anything about Quan and have any sort of attachment to him. And also, she wouldn't remember anyway, because again, I'm pretty sure she has amnesia. In terms of gameplay, Avo starts with capped speed and also capped skill. I don't remember. Um, but not very good strength. She and her growth rates are terrible. She's the Jagan of this game, like through and through. Again, the Jagan, in case you don't remember, is the character that joins at the beginning of the game that is really, really strong, stronger than anyone else you have on your team at that point. But then over time, becomes weaker and doesn't necessarily hold up as well. Mileage may vary. Sometimes Jagans can stay really good all the way through the late game, and I'm not even talking about like Oifi archetype characters that have high growth rates. I'm talking about like Jagans. There are ways that you can make them good in the late game for sure. So don't take that as gospel. It's a trend, not necessarily 100% fact that Jagans always fall off, you know. Avel, without spoiling anything too much, I mean, again, if you're watching this or listening to this, I assume you know the plot of Thracia. If you don't, I'm gonna be spoiling it, but I'll try to keep it like relatively tame on events like in the future. Avel does not get a lot of availability in this game. She is around for I want to say uh 5 chapters total in the entire game. You can't use her for any of the other ones, and there are about like 26 or so chapters in the game, more counting guidance. So it's about 30 or 31 chapters. Now, the upside of this is that in these first few chapters, Abel is extremely good, and there's really no reason to use her. In fact, because she is required for story progress later on, I am pretty sure that she is hard coded to not be able to die. As in, if she gets on low HP and an attack would kill her, it is scripted to miss. Now, there is some dialogue that implies that she's captured. I don't know if that's like unused dialogue or like dialogue that is maybe it's only used in a couple chapters. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure I heard. I'm like I think this is like if it's wrong, it is a very common misconception because I have heard numerous people back this up that Avel is hard coded to be invincible for the first few chapters that she is around. Usually they get around this by just having like if a character is required for the story, basically what they'll do is they'll have a character retreat, which is, kind of lame and I don't like that approach usually. I'm okay with it like used sparingly, like every once in a while it's fine, but if you use it excessively, then it removes a lot of the tension, both when you're fighting villains and they retreat, that sucks. But then also if a character gets killed and they're like, oh man, that sucks, I'll permanently injured, I can't fight anymore, then it's like, all right, now I just like I don't feel bad because they died. I'm just kind of like, oh man, I can't use that character anymore. That's kind of lame. So I like this workaround because I think they felt comfortable doing this because they only had to worry about it for like 1 or 2 chapters. Well, not 1 or 2, like 4 or 5 chapters. So they weren't worried about people being able to abuse it, I guess, because it's only for such a short section of the game. And frankly, she's probably not going to die anyway. She has such high speed that her dodge rate is through the roof, and you're almost definitely not going to get to the point where she would have died anyway. Doesn't really matter. And those are the characters. We're going to get more in a few minutes, but for the first part, that's all we have. I think it's like a turn or two into the map. That is all we have. Now, once you start actually playing the map, there is something you're going to notice pretty quickly, I would say. Well, there's a few things. First of all, is the capture command. Capturing is, I've more or less already explained how it works, but essentially, you can take a hit to your stats and make combat a little bit harder, but if you beat the enemy, then you basically force, like, rescue them, you pick them up, and you can carry them around and stuff, and you can steal their items and put them onto yourself, and then let them go. This is how, there are some items and weapons that can only be captured through this method. Um, Certain items are extremely rare and valuable. So capturing is incentivized. Keeping an eye on your enemy's inventory is incentivized. Like for that reason, because you want to get cool items. But also, there's no way to get money in this game. You are never given money as a reward for saving a village, for opening a chest, nothing like that. You can only get money by selling items, which means that if you want to buy stuff from a store, you're going to need money by selling items. Usually the way this works out, because the thing you would buy from the store anyway is weapons, right? So usually I just cut out the middleman and capture the weapons and then use the weapons. But you could also sell them if there's like a specific weapon you want or a specific item you want, whatever you want to do. Your characters can also be captured. When the enemy has a chance to go for it, they will, especially if your character is unarmed, then they will always try to capture your character, I believe. This can be used to your benefit by basically allowing a unit to get captured. It means that they won't attack someone that turn and no one has to die. So you can, like, it's called capture baiting. It's a strategy you can use, especially in like some of the master chapters that are coming up in next episode. So I'll keep an eye out for those. They're pretty cool actually, and you can, if you see anyone like high level play Thracia, then you'll probably see them employ it as well. It's a really great strategy for keeping some of your units alive in harder maps. You do have to be careful though, because they will steal all of your items, and there's no way to get them back unless you steal them back with a thief. But you can't capture them because they're holding you, and you can't. You have to kill them to make it so that they're not holding you. So unless you steal the items back with a thief, you're just not getting, like, if you lose a valuable item on a unit, then that's it. It's just gone. So don't use this strategy willy nilly. You got to really make sure that you're not losing anything important. The other thing that you're going to notice is that despite how high Avel's skill is, the fact she's using a sword, the fact that she sometimes has weapon triangle advantage, I don't know if there are any axe enemies in this level, but in next chapter you'll definitely see she's fighting axe wielding enemies, and she only has 99 hit. That's kind of weird, right? I mean, you think it would be 100, and if it's not 100, it's a little weird that they're all 99 instead of some of them being 98, 97, whatever. There's a reason for that. In this game, for some reason, the highest hit you can have at any given time is 99%. There is always, bare minimum, 1% chance that you will miss. And the reverse is also true. The lowest hit you can have is a 1% chance. So there's always at least a 1% chance that you're going to get hit. Now, this is something that I've seen people complain about. I've complained about it. I'm not going to take, abdicate responsibility from that. I have 100% complained about this. In more recent times, I've kind of lightened up on it a little bit because in practice, it's not important. You're if you really like the odds of you getting screwed over by that are so low. It can happen. And when it does happen, it is the most frustrating thing that could conceivably happen. You have a perfect strategy and you miss because of a 1% chance, and it's just the whole thing falls apart. That is beyond frustrating. But you could go an entire playthrough without having that happen. And missing is almost always, like, you're usually not going to have, like, you usually wouldn't have 100 hit anyway. Most of the time you're going to be facing a hit in like the 90s or 80s. So it's fine. It's not that big of a deal. Um, the biggest thing that I have with it though is just like why I cannot conceive a reason for it other than Kaga wanting to maintain a level of like, oh, you never know what's going to happen. Anything can go wrong at any time, which is just frustrating. I don't want like I don't want the flaw in my strategies to be down to random chance. Um, because that's the thing, right? Like, there's always a chance to fail, but you're always aware of those chances. Like if you see an enemy and you have 80 hit on that enemy, you have to make the decision to, okay, do I want to take this gamble? And then if it doesn't work, that's on you because you took that calculated risk, it didn't pay off, and now you face the consequences for it. It can still be frustrating, but it is at least something that you decided to do. It is a decision that you made, and the consequences are a direct result of that. In this game, you can't play around the 99% hit unless you just like always have a contingency plan for every single enemy all the time. Like there's you can't like you're fighting like Avel's level 20, she's fighting a level 1 brigand and they're about to get to a village. You shouldn't need 2 or 3 guys to gang up on this guy to guarantee that he goes down. I mean, even then, there's an infinitesimally small chance that he doesn't die. So even then, there's no way to be perfectly safe. There's no way to play around the chance. Like people complain about critical hits in Pokemon a lot. Absolutely frustrating. I get it. But you can play around it. A lot of people don't think you can, but you can avoid critical hits by recognizing, okay, if I get crit while my health is at this low of a level, I will die. So I'm mostly talking about Nuzlocks. But, if you get crit in a Nuzlocke, that's on you because usually there's a moment where you can recognize, okay, my health is so low that I will die from this. Sometimes there's nothing you can do and you just have to take the risk, but it's not always. In this game, you always have to take the risk, and there's no strategy involved. It's just frustrating. Again, in practice, extremely minor, will almost never affect you, but when it does, it is the most infuriating shit ever. And I don't like it. But again, not a big deal. After a couple turns, we get some new arrivals, 3 to be specific. We don't really know what they're doing here. We don't know who they are. All we know is that one of them seems to have a connection with Ava and talks about wanting to help her. So they join the fight. And then a third guy comes trailing behind the first 2 people. And he kind of seems like dejected. He's like, oh man, not again, or something like that. Um, these are their relationship is explained in a little bit more depth later on. But essentially, they are bandits that Avil has like talked into the side of good, and they want to help her out. And they also want the chance to fight the Empire themselves. So we'll start with Tanya. Tanya is an archer, and well, as a character, she's super boring. As I've said, actually, I didn't specify it was her, but Tanya has a little bit of a romantic subplot with Orson, who we're gonna see later. Which we're gonna see later. We've already seen Orson. We haven't seen the romance plot at all. But I mean, she seems kind of like I don't know. She's so boring. She's kind of brash. She's kind of like hot headed. I guess reminds me a little bit of Larcy, maybe. Kind of like mean to Orson a little bit. Actually, Orson is mean to her, and she's just kind of mean back. It reminds me a little bit of a Lynn Hector dynamic, slightly. Not nearly as fleshed out, although that one wasn't fleshed out either. But you know what I mean. Very minor. She's so boring, and then she's also bad in gameplay. I'm using her because, of course, I am. I think I'm using her. I don't remember. It's been a while since I played these maps, but I remember putting some levels into her, so I'm gonna try to use her. I think. Archers are bad. Get used to me saying that. I there FE4 was a little bit of a nice break because in those games, archers were bad because they were on foot, but like the mounted archers, like Midir and Lester, were not that bad. They weren't great, but they were okay. There were definitely advantages to having a bow user on your team. In this game, not particularly. The few bow wielding characters are really, 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 really bad. Um, there's like 1 or 2 that are okay, like Selfina, that's her name, right? Yeah, she's okay, she's fine. But Tanya's terrible. We get Ronan later, who is terrible. We get like Robert, who's terrible, And part of that is that all of them have terrible stats as well, but then also bows just suck. The fact that most enemies are just going to be able to walk up to you and attack you, and you can't do anything back to them, makes you really, really limited in how much you can be used. Because in a lot of games, most of the killing is done on enemy phase. This is a distinction that a lot of people draw between certain games. Like some games are player phase focused, where a lot of the action happens on player phase. Enemies are so strong that you need to get rid of them as quickly as possible. So being proactive is really important. Whereas in enemy phase focused games like this one, enemies are so weak that you can just plop a strong unit down and then the enemies will walk up to them and suicide. That is generally the distinction. This game is much more enemy phase focused, and as a result, the meta more or less revolves around you plopping a strong unit down and having them suicide or having the enemies suicide off of the big guy. In this case, Dagdar. But we'll talk about that in a minute. The inherent problem with archers then is that you can't like the enemies will not suicide off of an archer unless they are other archers or like 1-2 range attacking enemies that don't have another option, like that can't walk up to you and attack. It's almost never going to happen. Tanya in particular is really bad again because her stats are so bad, but it's just an inherent problem with archers, and we're going to see more and more of this as the series go on. Some games, I can only think of like three maybe games that are where archers are like actually good. FE11, FE12, and Three Houses are the only ones. Even that is like more maybe Conquest 2. Those are like the most player phase focused games in the series. Even other player phase focused games like FE6, the archers are kind of bad and mostly like only good because they have like if they have like really high stats like Shin. But yeah, I'm getting off topic. Tanya's really bad. Dagdar, on the other hand, is incredible. Dagdar is the other Jagan. This game basically has two. Dagdar is a little bit more traditional of a Jagan because he's around for the entire game, unlike Avel, or well, not the entire game, but no one's around for the entire game except Leaf. But Dagdar has a lot more availability than Avel. He's around for almost every chapter and has a very similar vibe of this guy's extremely strong when you get him, and his growth rates are so bad that by the end of the game he won't be as strong. He's still very, 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 very good. I actually lose him a lot around the mid game, so he might die for me. But until then, he's absolutely getting used. He is also really good for capturing. Oh, I should mention, capturing relies a lot on a stat called build, which is most easily comparable to a stat that would later become known as constitution. Doesn't work exactly the same way, but it is similar. Basically, it's just a stat that determines how big you are, how swole you are, and if you have higher build than your enemy, you can capture them, or at least attempt to capture them, and they can't capture you back. So really high build characters are really good at capturing usually, whereas really low build characters are pretty bad at capturing and often will get captured themselves. So build is a pretty important stat, and Halvin has a lot of it. Or well, Halvin also has a lot of it, but Dagdar has a lot of it. Is what I meant to say. Incidentally, this is also why horses are so good. Part of the reason why horses are so good in this game is because every character on a horse is treated as having 20 build, which is the max. So you cannot capture a character that is on horseback unless you somehow force them to dismount, which you can do, but it's not easy. Yeah, and then that's it. Like they can capture everyone except other 20 build characters, which some bosses, even non-mounted ones, do have 20 build just because they really didn't want you stealing their items. But it's very, very, very uncommon. Dagdar also has a skill called Accost, which is again a skill that works kind of like the one in FE4, but is different. Essentially, I believe the way it works is that if Dagdar's HP and speed are higher than the enemy he's facing, he will get an additional round of combat, like always. I don't know if it exactly works that way. I think there's some like differences. Some circumstances could be different, but basically what this means is that every enemy he fights, he'll have like 6 chances to hit them. And if he's using the Brave Axe, that becomes 12 chances, and it goes on and on and on. So he's really good at capturing for that reason, because even though his stats are low, he may not have a high chance to crit, or a high chance to hit, I should say, or might not double because his speed is lowered. He still has a really good chance of capturing because of a cost and because of the Brave Axe. And he's just really good in general. He's got really high HP, really high attack and defense. He's has really two really big flaws. First is of course his resistance, which if you're looking at the stat screen, you might think, well, there's no resistance stat here. How do I know what my character's resistance is? Every character's resistance stat is the same as their magic stat for some reason. I don't know what that's about. That also means that pure waters, which are an item that return later in the series, usually they give a +7 resistance. In this game, in order to give a +7 resistance, you also have to give a +7 magic, which is broken. And we'll see how insane that can be later down the line. But for now, just know that characters with low magic are going to be really susceptible to magic attacks. This is going to be a really, really long episode because we haven't even like made it into the first map yet. And I'm talking about chapters 1, 2, 2X, and 3. So it's going to be a long one, but also you got to keep in mind that I'm explaining all the mechanics, which are kind of a lot. Um, there's a lot to talk about in terms of like all the new mechanics and stuff. So bear with me here. But Dagdar is really good. He's just strong. That's all there is to it. The last character is Marty. If you look at Marty's stats, you're gonna see he has 0 skill and 0 speed, and I mean, first of all, he just looks funny, but he's also kind of a meme because like he's so bad. He's one of those characters that like they made bad on purpose, kind of like Arden. He has terrible stats, and really his only purpose is to hit hard. He can use the Brave Axe, and he has really high build and a really high build growth. One of the ways that build is different from con, as we see in the later games, is that build can level up in the same way that other stats do, whereas con, you cannot level up in like the GBA games. But Marty has a really, really high con growth, or really high build growth. So he's going to be able to capture like everyone and transfer enemies around. So he's got some utility niches for sure, but he's not that good. In fact, he's quite bad. I have used Marty in the past because, like I said, it's pretty easy to use just about anyone. What's interesting about him is that he gets +7 to skill and speed, or like +6 to skill, +7 to speed, something like that. Really, really high promotion bonuses. He gets those when he promotes, like on the same level as like mages in this game, which are notorious for having really high promotion gains. Marty gets similar promotion gains, so he's definitely not completely unsalvageable, but no character is. So Marty's quite bad by this game standards, and he should really only be used if you like him, or if you just want his utility of being able to carry a lot of people around. if a character is if a character has a build that is more than half of your build, I think is how it works, then your movement is dropped by half, I think. I'm pretty sure that's how it works. It's a little confusing, but you'll notice it a couple times. Like you'll pick someone up and you'll be able to move fine, and then you'll go and pick another person up and you won't be able to move nearly as well. And you'll be like, "What the fuck? What's going on?" If a character has 20 build and picks up a character with 10 build, they'll be fine. But if they pick up a character with 11 build, their movement gets cut in half. Essentially, is what I'm trying to say. It'll be relevant sometimes. You're almost never going to think about it until you're actually in a situation where you're carrying someone and you're like, shit, my movement is really low. I shouldn't have done this. At least it's not something that I usually think about until it's too late. Maybe you'll be different. I don't know. Movement stars. Have you ever seen a movement star? Movement stars are a new mechanic that basically give you a chance to move again after you have moved. You've completed your action. Uh, every character has a number. I mean, some characters have 0, but the max you can have is 5, and then most characters have like between like 1 and 3 or something like that. Basically, every star on the stat screen represents a 5% chance to move again. So if a character has 3 stars, they have a 15% chance. They have 15% chance to move a second time after completing their first action. It's weird. It's never something you can rely on, and the enemies also have it and can just screw you over randomly for an account for like something that you could not have accounted for. So I don't like them generally. I think they're just kind of an annoying addition, but it's another thing that feels good when it goes off. What is a really, really cool addition and one of the most serotonin inducing pleasures boosters in the history of Fire Emblem is the fact that you can, in this game, level up movement. Yes, there is an extremely low, almost always less than 5% chance to level up movement when you get a level up. And in fact, my Leaf got a movement level up as his very, very first level up, which was great. And I wanted to talk about that because that's just crazy how rare that is. It's like I don't know what Leaf's movement growth is, but it's definitely not very high. It's like 3% or something like that. So to get it on the very first level is insane. You can see how this is broken. You know, like some characters who should not have high movement suddenly have high movement. It's pretty cool, but most of the time it's just going to be a nice like, oh, that's cool. I think it caps at a certain point. I think the max movement you can have is like 10 or 12, something like that. And sometimes you just get really lucky in some characters. Like I had a Dawson one run that had it's his base movement is like 5. I had Dawson with 9 movement, so he leveled up 4 times in movement by the end of that playthrough, and that was insane. He was like my best unit. That it was crazy. I had him captain like everything. I didn't even really do scroll rigging at all. It just looked out that way. It was crazy. Most of the villages here are pretty uneventful or stuff that I've already talked about. Orson's house is kind of funny. His dad kind of like gets on his case a little bit, and he kind of is like, "Shut up, dad. Um, you're not my real dad. Stop telling me what to do." And then Halvin's is really boring, but they get their good items. The Brave Axe is like really, 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 really good. I would say that the Brave Axe is better than the Pooji, just like in a vacuum. It's just like it's just like the Brave Axe is insane, but it doesn't make Halvin good because Halvin doesn't have to use it. It could be anyone. There is a house that I thought was cute because you get a stat booster from it, and it's a ring. And if you played FE4, then you see the stat rings, and you might be thinking, okay, well, in that game, you just let them sit in your inventory passively that like you didn't have to use the item. You just like got the boost while it was sitting in your inventory. This house kind of diegetically, not diegetically, it's pretty overt, but it's just it takes a minute to explain like no, you can't just wear it on your finger. You have to use it to get any benefit from it, which is a nice way of like people who started with FE4 explaining like no, we're doing things different this time. Why he put that level of thought into that specific mechanic change and not any of the other ones, far be it for me to try to ascertain his thought process. This might even be like a Project Exile special, I don't know. But if that is in the original Japanese script, I have to wonder why Kaga would explain that, but not go on to explain like anything else about this game. It's weird. So that's it. I mean, this chapter is not like the gameplay of this chapter is nothing really special. It's a first chapter. It introduces some of the mechanics to you, and in a way that feels good, and it doesn't feel like a shitty like first chapter in the same way that something like I don't know. It doesn't feel like a tutorial chapter. Is basically what I'm trying to say. It respects your intelligence and it treats itself like a normal like early game chapter of a game, but it's pretty standard. It does a good job of explaining its mechanics to you for the most part. Capturing is explained pretty well. Movement stars are not, but that's I can't you can't win them all. The ring stat booster mechanic is explained. There's some fun character interactions, some fun dialogue. Orson and Tanya have like a little bit of a spat where they're just assholes to each other. Again, it's mostly Orson and then Tanya kind of just retaliates, but still, it's fine. I'm not gonna say it's like a bad chapter, but it's also wholly unremarkable. At the end of it all, we find out that Nana and Marita have been taken to Manster, which is a name you're going to want to remember because it's pretty important. Manster, if you recall, if you remember the layout of FE4, Manster was in Chapter 8, and it was between where you fought Bloom and where you fought like the Thracian Drago Knights. It's where Sed pops up on that in that chapter. And then Leaf says that he wants to give chase. I mean, these are his close friends. Obviously, Avel wants to get her daughter back. Finn wants to get Nana back. So Leaf decides that he's going to go after them because he says, I will never again let someone sacrifice their life in exchange for mine. Pretty standard stuff, but you got to remember, like, there aren't a lot of lore. Like, most lords are kind of written off as being generic. And that's true. Like, I hear this and I think, like, if you quoted this to me and I didn't know it was from Thracia, I would not be able to tell you. Like Marth could say this, Seliph could say this, Ellawood could say this. Maybe not like Hector, but someone who's another good example. Micaiah, Dimitri, all these characters have had traumatic events and deaths in their lives. Oftentimes, they were the result, insofar as or not like they were the cause, in the sense of like they sacrificed their lives to save the main lord. That's a pretty common trope in these games. But with Finn, or with Leaf, I should say, this is a really, really like potent statement in my opinion, because he's not just like, he hasn't seen it like once or twice. This is a very, very consistent theme throughout his life. He has moved from place to place. It doesn't say anything about why, but you have to imagine that this isn't the first time that this has happened. They've been on the run for 13 years. There have been than more than ample opportunities for characters to sacrifice their life for Leaf. Like they show up at a village, Empire shows up, some villagers die, and they have to move on. So I think that Leaf, more than any other lord, has the right to say this, because he's seen it happen over and over again, presumably. Maybe not, but presumably. And so they all agree to set out after Raedric and get Nana and Marita back, and that's the end of this chapter. Again, not super special. The story is pretty good. I actually think the story starts off on a really strong note. I think Leaf's a compelling character already. I think Avel, I mean, relatively, right? Like the series is not known for like amazingly complex and deep lords. RPG protagonists in general are not like known for having strong starts. A lot of them develop over the course of their games, but think about any like art JRPG protagonist and think about like how common some of those like personality traits are and everything. I don't know. I feel like Leaf's story and his relationship with the characters have already established himself as being a little bit unique, and I like that. It's pretty cool. I like Avel. I like Finn. I like Marty. I like Marty a lot. I never really talked about Dagdar and Marty as characters, but I like Dagdar's concept of like a bandit who was turned away from evil and now fights for good. I think that's a really cool concept, especially since like it's kind of trite to see it like happen, like see it play out, but the fact that it like already happened off screen is like, oh, okay. It makes you like curious. You're like, I wonder what this guy's story is. I wonder if we're gonna find out about that later. I don't think we find out about it in this chapter. I think that's later. I don't remember though. And then Marty's just kind of goofy. He's a fun meme. He's like the Arden of this game, not nearly as quotable or as iconic, but certainly in the same vein of like he's a goofball that a lot of characters like to make fun of, and they tried to capture some comedic energy with him that works pretty well. I'm not going to say he's gut bustingly funny, but he's pretty good. So next up we have chapter 2, which is called The Village of Iz. On his way to Manster, Leaf comes across a village that's being attacked by bandits and decides that the right thing to do is to step in and stop it. Pretty standard stuff. The first thing we see, though, is a character named August, who is working as the strategist for the bandits. It's kind of unusual. I don't think we ever see a bandit group with a strategist at any point in the series outside of this. I mean, they kind of like August is going to be important for the rest of the story, so they needed to introduce him somehow. I guess this is as good a way as any. But he tells them that August tells the bandits that this kind of body count isn't really necessary. So we see that yeah, he's working for the bandits, but he's not like evil. He just kind of wants to make money, which is not better really, but at least he's trying, right? Um, but then the bandit he's working with kind of lets slip that Leaf is coming, and August is very interested by this and decides that it is time to leave Lithis behind. Lithis is not this bandit, but a different one who's kind of somewhere else. He's kind of like the leader of this bandit group. He decides that he's going to part ways with Lithis because he's very interested in what Leaf is doing, and decides that he has to inform his benefactor, to use his words, or alert his benefactor. So we kind of put some intrigue in there, like, oh, who is he working for? What's going on here? Pretty good stuff. We also get a little bit of tidbit. We also get a little bit. The we also get a little tidbit about August here. where apparently he used to be with the church but isn't anymore, and he has a history of violence to the point where apparently Liffus claims that August taught him everything he knew about interrogating and torture and stuff like that. So clearly not a morally upright person, but for whatever reason he's very interested in Leaf, so we got to keep an eye on that. So when Leaf shows up and they see that bandits are attacking the village, Leaf wants to jump in and help people. And what struck me as cool about this is that in pretty much every other game, you have a character. Merlinus is the most infamous example of this, but there are others like Frederick from Awakening. Seth in Sacred Stones does this. Soren in Titania. They're kind of like the advisors, and oftentimes in a situation like this, you'd get a little interaction where the Lord's like, "We need to help people," and then the advisor's like, "We shouldn't do that. We're in a hurry. We need to move on and leave these people behind." And the Lord's like, "No, we can't do that. That's against my moral principles." And that's, it happens all the time. It's nice to establish a dynamic between like the Lord and his colleagues, and also um, cement that, like, yes, they're a good person and stuff like that. This was a nice, refreshing change of pace because Leaf says we're going to help these people. No one has a quip. No one has a word to say about this. They're all just like, "Yep, all right, let's do it," and that's great. It's the little things, right? Like everyone's all on the same page about this, and it's nice to see them. I mean, I guess at this point it wasn't really an established tradition that they would do stuff like that. It kind of started in the next game. So yeah, I don't know why they did that. It really doesn't make any sense to me, but it's a small detail. So this is our first map with a Gaiden chapter attached to it. Gaiden chapters are a staple in the series nowadays. They've kind of taken on a new form as paralogs, but essentially they are optional chapters that you can skip. And in certain games, they actually have requirements for you to get them at all. In more recent games, you are always given the option to go to them, and you can like opt not to. But in some of the older games, it's more of like a secret requirement that you have to fulfill certain conditions to unlock. And this is the first instance of that we see in the series. This one's really easy. We just need to make sure that all the houses get saved, which is something you're probably going to do anyway. It's not that hard to save all the villages, especially in an early game map like this. So this is a nice way of teaching the player a little bit about Gaiden chapters, although it's not transparent about it at all. So people probably aren't going to figure out what, like, this is a problem with Gaiden chapters in general. We're going to see this repeat again with FE6 and FE7. Uh, yeah, FE6 and FE7, where there's no indication of like what you have to do to unlock these maps. You kind of just have to like get lucky, and then if you play through them again and you get one you didn't get before, or you don't get one that you did get before, you're like, oh, I must have done something different, and you just piece it together like that. I think it's fine to do it that way. It kind of sucks in FE6, especially that the good ending is locked behind that really kind of like uh not obscure, but Gaiden requirements that are not made clear to you in any way, shape, or form. That's kind of a bummer, but it's not the end of the world. You can still beat the game without going to any guidance. And in FE7, the Gaiden maps are pretty much all optional. You only unlock like a little bit of extra story content with them, so it's not a big deal. And this game also kind of has that same thing as FE7, where it's not really significant if you go to all of them. It's just kind of a nice little. Well, that's not true because there are some things in certain Gaiden maps that you really, really want. Um, this one in particular, I think, is really the only one that has a Gaiden map attached to it. That if you miss it, you're missing out on like significant amounts of content. That might not be true. I don't know. We'll explore this more as we get more Gaiden chapters and later maps. But what I'm basically trying to say is if you miss a couple, it's fine. It's not the end of the world. This one is a little bit more important for you to get, but also it's really easy to get, so I don't think that it's going to trip most people up. Still kind of weird that they made it optional, but whatever. The actual map is pretty straightforward. It's a bit akin to what you would see, again, in like an early game of most other games. You just have bandits. The last chapter actually had a decent enemy variety. Well, it wasn't really a good enemy variety. It was all lance wielding enemies and then some archers. but it was a nice change of pace from the early game of most Fire Emblems where it's just all axe users. And in this chapter, they're like, all right, we held back for one chapter. Let's let the axe users out now. So it's just all axe guys. Pretty easy. Most of your, not most of them, but a lot of your characters are using swords. This is a nice place if you're gonna do it anywhere. This is a decent place to train up Finn's sword rank. Not to say that you want to do that. I'm not recommending that you train the sword rank on your mounted units just so you can use them indoors. But Finn is one of the few that has like an opportunity to actually do something with the sword in the early game. I mean, he's the only one that has something to do with the sword in the early game. And that's nice because if you want to use him for the whole game, which I'm sure a decent amount of people will want to because he's an important character to the story, this is a good way to like make him not completely useless indoors if you just have him grind his sword rank on these guys. Not super necessary. In fact, I wouldn't even recommend it. But if you're gonna do it, it might as well be here. One of the houses in the top right is like a little bit tricky to get, but considering you have Avel, who is like a god, you have a lot of characters that are just completely godly at this point. You can just cut right up there and not have to worry about it. There's a lot of guys here though, and it is entirely possible that you will get killed at some point and have to reset. Thankfully, the maps are still pretty short. They're gonna get much longer, trust me. And I mean, if you started with FE4, then this is gonna be a weird change of pace for you because there's no autosave. So if a map is long and you lose someone and you don't want to keep them dead, you are going to have to reset the whole map, which is, I mean, obviously not as bad as it would have been in FE4, but it can still be annoying. And I mean, obviously, this is kind of the series standard unless you're playing in a game with a turn wheel mechanic like Shadows of Valencia or Three Houses. But most games, yeah, you kind of need to either play on casual mode or reset a map if someone dies or let them stay dead, which plenty of people opt to do. That's a fine strategy as well. Character just isn't going to be useful to you anymore, just let him die. It's not a big deal. But make good use of the terrain. There's some nice terrain in this map. There's some forests. There's some houses that you can stand on for more void. It's really good. Last map didn't really do a good job of teaching you anything about terrain, but here it does give you plenty of opportunity to take advantage of that sort of thing. So it's a good map. I mean, it's simple. It's an early game map. They don't really get any complex. You don't really see many complex maps in early games, and this is no exception. But it's a really solid map. I would say that this, as far as like bandits attacking a village goes, this is one of the most interesting in the series, really, because there's choke points, there's terrain, there's plenty of side objectives, and of course, there's a guidance map attached to it. We also get a new character if you visit the house that's kind of like in the middle of the map over on the left side. You will get Ronin, who is another character in the archetype that I kind of talked about in FE4 in regards to Holland, of like this average everyman character who doesn't have any connection to the main lord. He's not his friend. He's not his like servant or his benefactor or anything like that. He's just a guy who wants to do the right thing, and that's pretty cool. I like Ronin. Again, that's like Colin. It's not like he's not a spectacularly written character or anything. He doesn't get a lot of screen time. I don't know if he has like any additional conversations or anything like that. I'm pretty sure this is the last we see of him outside of his death quote. But he's cool. I like Ronin. His design, I love his design. I think is he in Heroes? I think he's in Heroes. Let me see. He is. Damn, he looks sick. In terms of gameplay, Ronin is awful. He does have a very interesting quirk that, if you know anything about him, you probably know that he has a 45% magic growth for some reason. There's speculation that maybe his magic growth and his strength growth were swapped by accident, in which case that's funny as hell. But even if that wasn't the case and they just wanted to make him like a res, like, I mean, that's the thing, right? Because there have been plenty of characters in other games that have like weirdly high resistance, just like mage killer type enemies that are like in a physical class but have high resistance, so they're able to deal with mages reasonably well. At least that's the idea. In practice, it doesn't always work out that way. They might have been trying to do that with Ronin. That's my best guess because I don't think he has I don't think there's a magic bow in this game, so it's not like he can ever use it offensively. So they were probably comfortable giving him a pretty high magic growth to make him more of like a res tank, I guess. But the bigger problem is that he has a 15% strength growth, so he's just never going to level up strength. It's fine. He does have like 3 movement stars, I think, so he's kind of fun. He procs movement stars fairly often compared to your other units, so he'll be able to run around and do stuff. I don't know. He's fun. He can be fun to use. I've used him before. He's all right. The thing about we're gonna see next, not next chapter, but the chapter after, we're gonna see the introduction of scrolls, which make issues like this pretty much non-factors. Like growths being bad basically don't matter in Thracia to make a unit good, as we're gonna see later. So he's definitely usable for sure. And I don't know. I just like I like his design. He's pretty cool. And I'm not sure if I'm going to use him this time. I might be using Tanya instead. I've used them both in like different playthroughs, so it's he's good. I like him. You save all the villages, you beat the boss, probably with Avil, and you capture the throne with Leaf. Now, usually, you can track the logic of like, oh, why didn't you get the Gaiden? If you know the requirement and you see like both cutscenes, you can like you can understand like why you wouldn't get the Gaiden in one scenario. Like for example, in FE6 Chapter 8, the Gaiden requirement is that Lilina. Why? Jesus Christ! I just completely blanked on her name for no reason. The Gaiden requirement in that chapter is that Lilina survives. That makes perfect sense because after the chapter, Lilina is the one who shows you the way to the Durandal Cave, which is the explanation for why you have 8X in the first place. So if she's not alive, she can't show you the way, and you won't be able to find it by yourself, so you just, And FE6 is actually pretty good about this. Like, if you know the requirement explaining the logic to you, most of the time it's because, like, you took too long and the burn soldiers either got to it first or sealed off where it was. That makes perfect sense. And in other instances, it's because certain characters would have been able to show you the way, and you would not be able to find it on your own. So if you don't have those characters, then you just can't get there. The reason I bring this up is because Chapter 2 does not have this, which is weird. I don't really understand the logic here at all. If you save all the villages, basically, if you saved all the houses, Leaf decides that he needs to go deal with Lithus now because otherwise he's just going to attack the village again. Whereas if one or more houses are destroyed, then Leaf decides suddenly that dealing with Lithus is not a problem, I guess. Maybe it's the logic is that he already dealt with Iz, so he's not going to come back. I don't know. That might be it. Either way, Leaf meets up with August, who decides that he wants to help Leaf and show him the way to the Corsair Isles where Lithus is hiding. Leaf kind of questions why he would know the way, because obviously he doesn't know that he's working with Lithus or that he was working with Lithus. So he just kind of gives some vague bullshit answer about how he has a lot of surprises left in him after all. And then even if you don't get the Gaiden chapter, August decides to accompany you to the next chapter, chapter 3. But we are going to be going to 2X. We're going to be doing every Gaiden chapter in every game because the point of this is to show off every chapter. We will never not have the Gaiden to talk about, but I will briefly mention kind of like what the scenario is if you do not meet the Gaiden requirement, essentially. That's the end of the chapter. Pretty, very, extremely basic on the story side of things, although we're already hitting a nice note of intrigue. This is something I complained a lot about in FE4, how there wasn't a lot of intrigue. Any intrigue that was introduced was immediately shot down by either the NPCs or just like your own intuition because it was obvious. In this, you actually have a really interesting. I'm not trying to overstate it, right? Like you see August and you're like, oh, what's going on with this old dude? And that's enough for me, right? Like he clearly has some kind of story to tell. He has a mysterious benefactor that's interested in Leaf's success, and he wants to help Leaf. And you don't know why, and you don't know what's going on. Is he going to betray Leaf? That's kind of the obvious implication, right? Because we know that he has like a history of doing bad things. So, and we know that he's working with Lithus. So the obvious assumption is like, okay, he's going to betray Leaf at some point, even if it's not the Lithus, it's someone else. So we're going to have to see how that unfolds because it's interesting. And I don't remember. I know like roughly what happens with August, but I don't remember every detail. So I'm interested to see where this goes because I think he's a cool character from what I remember. Other than that, the story in this chapter is basically non-existent. The gameplay's good. It's a simple map, but it does its job well. It encourages you to take advantage of choke points and terrain, and that's more than a lot of even mid and late game maps from some games like Three Houses and Awakening. So we'll take it. We'll take it. It's a good map. I like it. So the next chapter is chapter 2X, the Corsair Isles. So the first thing we see is someone among the bandits telling Lithis to not lay a hand on a cleric, and Lithis kind of acts intimidated and well, he not acts, he is intimidated and the guy who is threatening him walks away. So we can tell that like he's working with the bandits, but he clearly has someone he wants to protect. We then see this cleric named Safi, who says that she's working for someone named Lenoan in Tara, which, if you remember, is somewhere that Leaf stayed before he moved to Fianna, where Ava was. So this is someone who likely has a connection to Leaf, but we don't know exactly what kind of connection yet. She's looking for people to help Lenoan defend Tara from the Empire and tries to convince Lithis to do that. And Lithis agrees. I mean, she has to do a little bit of convincing, but Lithis decides to go along with it. I don't really know why Safi decided that going to notorious bandits was a good idea for like morally upstanding people who are going to help you defend against tyranny. But whatever, maybe she's just not the brightest light on the tree. I don't know. We cut to Leaf, who is cursing their luck that they arrived on the islands just in time for it to become night. They're having a hard time seeing, but August says that as long as you have torches, you should be fine. And Leaf says, "Well, funny story about that. We actually don't have any torches." And August is like, "All right, well, you'll still probably be okay." After a couple turns, one of the pirates talks to Lithis and says, "Hey, listen, are you really thinking about taking on the Empire? Because that's really dumb." And Lithis is like, "No, no, 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 no. I was just trying to get into her pants, man. Don't worry." Just kind of showing how much of a piece of shit Lithis is. There's a conversation that Leaf has with Avil at some point during the map that kind of I don't know if this is in the original script. I remember hearing somewhere that this is an invention of the translation patch, which is good because it needs to be, otherwise you would never figure this out. You can capture Lithis, and in fact, in order to recruit him onto your team, you can recruit Lithis. In order to get him, though, you need to capture him rather than killing him. And in this conversation, they kind of hint at that by saying that Avel says that Lithis isn't even worth killing, and you should just capture him and bring him to justice when the fighting is over. The actual gameplay of this map, that's all kind of like the setup stuff out of the way. The actual gameplay of this map introduces Fog of War, which is a mechanic that has become a standard in the series now. It's been in almost, I don't want to say almost every game. 5, 6, 7, 8, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Is it in 10? Yeah, it's in 10. Yeah, 12, maybe 11? I don't remember about 11. Yeah, so that's almost every game. It's not in Awakening. I don't believe it is in it's kind of in Revelation, but not really. And then it's in like one map in Three Houses. So it's about like 50-50, right? This is a mechanic that is widely bemoaned in the series. It's not it's kind of there are some people that like it, right? I'm not trying to say that everyone hates Fog of War. Otherwise, no one would play these games because they're in so many of them. But Fog of War is a mechanic. If for some reason you don't know how it works, in most games, what it does is it is like a layer of fog or darkness. It's in a lot of like real time strategy games, and it allows you to see the terrain and the like actual layout of the map, but it obscures enemies. And in some like real time strategy games, enemies might have like camps or structures that you can't see until you get close enough. That's pretty standard stuff in like those games. Doesn't work super well in Fire Emblem, in my opinion, um, because it's like there could be like six enemies waiting to jump you in the darkness, and you would have no idea. You can't react to them in real time like you would be able to in a real time strategy game. Like if you see a bunch of enemies coming in a real time strategy game, you can just like turn around or something like that. I don't play a lot of RTS games, so I don't know. But I have to imagine you have some recourse that isn't just like dying if you put yourself in the wrong position. Real-time strategy games also have usually lower stakes in that, like, if a character dies or like a unit of troops dies, then you will still that's not a huge deal. You can just get more. In Fire Emblem, every character has like a face and a personality attached to them. So if they die, you're much more tempted to reset, and it's a bigger deal when you lose a character. So having it be a result of lack of information, like again, it's about that, taking a calculated risk, right? You can't make a reasonable calculated risk if you don't have all the information. I mean, you can, but the less information you have, the less fair it's going to seem when that calculated risk goes bad. So part of the risk might be, well, I don't know if there are going to be reinforcements coming from this spot of the map, right? That's okay. That can happen sometimes. But that's a pretty uncommon occurrence, and in most instances, you are warned about reinforcements, especially same turn reinforcements. So it's really a matter of like gambling. Okay, I don't know when they're going to come, and I don't know exactly where they're going to come from, but I know they're coming soon and from this general area. So can I risk traveling through this area quickly? And then if that goes badly, you're like, okay, well, I had the information to make that decision. So withholding information isn't always a bad thing, is what I'm trying to say here. But in Fog of War maps, it's like you are given less information. You know less than you don't know. There's like basically where none of the enemies are. You often don't know where the boss is unless you've played the map before. It's just a pain in the ass, and I don't like them for sure. I think they're kind of annoying. Although, again, there's usually only like a handful per game, so it's not like it's a huge deal. You just kind of have to get through like one or two of them in any given game, and then you're fine for the rest of the time. In Thracia, first of all, there's just a lot of Fog of War maps. Like I can think of at least like 4 or 5 off the top of my head, which is more than most games. I think that the highest number outside of this game, I want to say, is like FE6, which also has 4 or 5. Maybe closer to like 3. I don't know. I'd have to count them, but I'm pretty sure like Thracia is on the high end of games in terms of number of Fog of War maps. But then also, and I'm been dancing around the elephant in the room. Thracia Fog of War works differently than it does in most Fire Emblem games. Even if you're okay with how it works in a lot of Fire Emblem games, you're probably not okay with how it works in Thracia because not only do you not know where the enemies are going to come from or where the enemies are at any given time, you also don't know the layout of the map because it doesn't just kind of like put a layer of fog or darkness over the map that you'll still be able to see like trees and rivers and bridges and stuff like that. Everywhere that's not in your field of vision is pitch black. You don't know anything. You could be going down a dead end. You could be going like you could be going across like into a choke point that you can't get past. You have absolutely no way of knowing the structure of the map until you go there, or unless you look up a map of it online or something like that. So it's obnoxious for sure. Like you like in case they didn't already take enough information away from you by not telling you where the enemies are, you also can't even know what the map looks like and the general direction that you're supposed to go in. That's a shame. It really is just not a great mechanic, and they use it a lot in this game. And I have to go to every. I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong, but I believe almost every map that uses it is a guided map. Not every map. There are a handful that use it that are like regular mandatory maps. So if you're playing casually, you can skip most Fog of War maps, which is good. I can't because I am choosing to play every chapter to talk about every chapter. So I can't skip the really obnoxious ones like 24x, I think it is, or 21x, something like that. I can't skip 14x. I can't skip 11x, like it's not fun. But I also have knowledge of the game already, and I'm not shying away from looking stuff up online. So I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. This is just reason number like 72 or whatever thrown onto the pile of why you should not play this game blind because it's not that fun. Outside of the Fog of War bullshit, the map is pretty standard. They actually throw a couple of promoted enemies at you, which is really scary. They throw some Dagdars at you. They're like warriors, I think, or berserkers or whatever Dagdar is. The goal is to go down to the bottom right. There's a bridge, and you go up north from the other side of the bridge, and there's Lithis. But there's also this whole section on the bottom left that's a complete red herring. I think there's a torch down there you can get, and there's some enemies. Like you're not just going to be wandering around aimlessly. You have stuff to fight to at least get experience. Um, but it's completely, like it's a complete waste of your time if you don't care about the experience. Slowly but surely, you make your way to Lithis and you capture him. He doesn't have any weapons, so you don't have to fight him. You can just walk up and capture him, which is good because he's on a throne. Capturing enemies on a throne is really, really hard because your stats are already lowered when you try to capture someone, and then thrones give them huge bonuses. So the fact that you don't actually have to capture, or the fact that you don't actually have to fight Lithis here to capture him is definitely really nice. People might choose to capture him anyway, just because like fighting this dodgy guy on the throne can be pretty tough. Although I don't know, I've never tried it. As you get closer, you'll find Shiva standing on a fort. Now, normally I would complain because you're not supposed to kill him here. If you kill him here, you can't recruit him later. But however, I'm pretty sure that most people aren't going to try to kill him because he's really, really strong. And especially standing on that fort, it's going to be a real tough time if you try to fight him. And you don't have to do it to beat the chapter, and most people are going to realize that. So they'll probably steer clear of him. I think that that's fine. I don't think the game has to explain everything to you. It just needs to be like I think that, and this is kind of subjective, but if it's a secret or an optional thing, I don't think the game has to explain it to you, but I do think that it has to put it in a position where most people are going to stumble into it by accident, for it to be considered like a good secret, in my opinion. Especially if it's like significant content, like a new character or something like that, or a guidance chapter. So after you capture the throne, they find Safi, who reveals that she does indeed have a history with Leaf. Leaf doesn't remember her at first, but after talking for a minute, Leaf does remember. Safi explains that after Leaf left Tara, things really broke bad. After Lenoan's father died, the Empire installed their own governor, who did some real bad shit. He installed child hunts in Tara, which is again a common theme popping up from FE4. And that was the last straw. The people of Tara revolted, but things did not go well, and now they're kind of on the back foot. And Safi was sent to try to find people to help defend Tara from the Empire. Leaf agrees to help. He doesn't say this, but he's going to go deal with Manster first, obviously, because he needs to go get Nana back. But he agrees to go help Tara after that is all settled, I suppose. If Lithis is captured and you didn't release him, he chimes in here and asks what's going to be done with him. Leaf tries to send him to Iz to receive his punishment, but Safi says that Lithis has agreed to help defend Tara, and Leaf is like, all right, well, if Safi believes you, then so do I. Come on, let's go. And Lithis kind of, after they leave, is like, haha, I pulled one over on him. Now I just gotta wait for my chance to get out of here. But it never happens. He never takes off at any point. He's with you for the entire rest of the game unless he dies or is captured. So you have to assume at some point he either legitimately turns into a good person, or more likely decides that sticking with Leaf is like the best thing for his safety. Um, Either way, it's an interesting little bit of off-screen development that we just kind of have to imply by the fact that he says he's going to leave, but then never does. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Renak from Sacred Stones, although Renak is obviously not a terrible murdering monster. Lithis is just a piece of shit who's out to save his own skin, unless he does go through some kind of off-screen change that we don't get to see. He also suggests he might sell Leaf out to the Empire. Again, we never see this happen, although there are some instances where the Empire gets the better of Leaf that might be like, oh, maybe Leaf has sold him out here. But it's never made explicit at any point if that is what happened. He also says that it'll have to wait until Safi has given in to my many charms, which of course never happens. So that might be the explanation. Maybe he's just like waiting to get laid first before he does anything, and because he never does, he just decides to stick around. Which, I mean, good. He doesn't deserve Safi, obviously, but that's kind of funny if that is the implication here. Gameplay wise, this map sucks. It's like the worst one so far. Not that that's a really impressive feat because we were only 3 chapters in. But it's pretty bad. I hate Thracia Fog of War. I hate Fog of War in general, but I hate Thracia Fog of War especially. So any chapter with Fog of War is not going to be a contender for like the best chapter we played that week. So this map is not very good. Story wise, there's some funny stuff going on with Excuse me. There's some funny stuff going on with Lithis, and that's pretty entertaining. I really like this idea of like Safi just being so fucking naive that she's like, all right, I'll believe you that you're gonna come help us with no questions asked, um, and just goes along with it. Leaf too, also just kind of agrees with it because he trusts Safi's judgment. There was a theme in FE4 that came up a lot of like naive decisions being punished. Doesn't seem like that theme carried over into FE5, which is fine. They can have like distinct stories with their own like themes and ideas. So I guess Leaf just got lucky. He made well, okay, that's not true. He makes bad decisions that do get punished, but not really like naive decisions, not like trusting people kind of bad decisions, but mostly like tactically bad decisions in terms of like where to send his troops and stuff like that. So this element of his character of like being willing to trust Lithis for no particular reason, even though he's done so many horrible things, is never like really brought up. I don't really get what the point here is. Usually I try to speculate on like, oh, what could Kaga have been thinking? But no, I think it was probably just put in here as like kind of a gag. And Lithis does come up a little bit later on, and does some stuff. So he probably just wanted him around for that. Okay. And the final chapter we're going to be talking about today is chapter 3, Kerberos's Gate. Now that Leaf has dealt with the bandit problem, he makes his way back towards Manster. But in order to get to Manster, he has to go through this gate located in a place called Kerberos. We see Raedric. This is the first time we've seen him since chapter 1. And he tells the guy on duty there, the kind of the leader there, he's like checking with him, seeing how things are going. They have captured some children. We saw the child hunts name dropped last chapter, but unlike in FE4, where it's like 3 whole chapters between like hearing about the child hunts and actually seeing them, we actually get to see them in action right after we hear about them for the first time, which is cool. Really cements this idea of like, yeah, this is a real active problem that is happening all over the place because this isn't like Tara is like way somewhere else. So it's happening in like multiple places. This isn't a one-off incident. This is the first we hear of the Magi, which is a rebel group that are operating in Manster, trying to help fight the Empire from within. And it's mentioned that they have a new man in charge. So they were thought to be wiped out, but then they came back and they have someone new in charge. This is another great example of them like putting intrigue in because you're like, oh, who are the Magi? What are they doing? Who's leading them? Who's this guy in charge? And we find out the answers to these questions later. And I will say also, the whole Lithis thing is another great example. I know that stuff doesn't pay off because I played the game before. But the idea, Lithis being like, oh, maybe I should betray Leaf to the Empire, maybe I should run away. You probably hear that, and a blind player is going to think, all right, well, that's going to have some kind of payoff later. He's either going to make the decision to stay and do the right thing, or he's going to make the decision to betray Leaf at some point. And he never does make that decision on screen, at least. But the fact that people are expecting him to is still valuable. It's like that's intrigue as well, even though it doesn't actually go anywhere. The average player playing for the first time isn't going to know that, so they're going to keep an eye on that. This is all great stuff. This is what I'm talking about that FE4 kind of lacked. This factor of ideas being put in your head, and you have to keep track of all these things, and you're wondering like, what are the outcomes of these ideas going to be? You might be more interested in some of them than others. Like for example, I heard about the Magi and I was like, I don't really care. It's just some rebel group that we're probably going to see later. I don't give a shit. But when I saw August for the first time, I was like, man, I'm really interested in this guy's story. I want to know what's going on with him. So I'm not saying that you're going to be invested in every plot thread that it like plants now, but you're going to be interested in some of them. And the more it plants, the more likely you are to find at least one that interests you. Especially the August one because that goes throughout the entire game. Raedric decides that he's going to be fill in there for a little while because his journey has been tough and he decides that he wants to relax in Kerberos for a little while. So we know he's chilling in the back. Leaf, unfortunately, does not know that he's chilling in the back, and that's going to come back to bite him later, but we'll get there when we get there. Here's another interesting detail that kind of sets Leaf apart in my mind from characters like Seliph. We cut to him, and he's talking with August, and August is like, "Yeah, this place really sucks." And Leaf is like, "Oh, why? What's going on?" And August explains the child hunts to him. Um, it's a little bit incongruous from Chapter 2X because it was explained there as well, but it wasn't really explained in any amount of detail. She kind of just drops it, and Leaf is like, "Oh, what do you mean child hunts?" But then she moves on without answering. So this is the first time that it's like well and properly explained to Leaf, and Leaf does not believe it. Not like, "Oh man, I can't believe that. That's crazy." Not in that sense. Not in the way that like Seliph couldn't believe it. He literally is like, "That is not true." I don't believe that. That's like an urban legend. That's a tall tale. That's nuts. And like he doesn't put up a fight about it for long. August is like, no, it really is happening. You got to trust me on this. It sounds unbelievable, but it really is happening. And he comes around. He's like, oh, okay, yeah. Well, then I guess I got to stop this. But the fact that Leaf's initial reaction is literally to think, I I cannot fathom the idea of like something so terrible happening. It has to be a lie because I can't believe that people would participate in something like that. And I think this speaks. I'm speculating a little bit here. This is going into like fan fiction headcanon realm, but I think it's well founded a little bit. Leaf has spent his entire life being surrounded by people who have helped him out of the goodness of their heart. Like they've been going from place to place, and we never hear a story about him being betrayed by anyone. It's always like the Empire shows up by coincidence or like gets an anonymous tip. Leaf is never betrayed by someone like who he's close with. It's always kind of just like worked out badly for him, and he's had to run away every time. And in Tara and Fianna, we see people literally put their lives on the line. Like in the first chapter, they had to torture villagers to get information about Leaf out of them. Like they were not like gonna sell him out without a fight. So Leaf has gone through life experience. Like obviously he's had a tough life, but he's been in positions where people have been willing to help him just because it's the right thing to do. They don't have any connection. They don't have any attachment to him other than if they know who he is, they might be like, oh, okay, he's gonna help bring about a good future for Leinster. You know, like that's a possible angle, but that's abstract. Some people might not even know who he is, and for the most part, I think it's safe to assume that the people are helping him because they want to and because it's the right thing to do. So Leaf has never been exposed to like the true depravity of like the banality of evil. This idea of like people will do terrible things for no reason other than it was they were told to do so. He's been surrounded by people who put their lives on the line to do the right thing, even at personal cost to themselves. So hearing that there are soldiers in the Empire who are so fucked up that they are willing to hunt down and bring children to be like brainwashed and indoctrinated into this cult, he literally can't comprehend that because that's so counter to what he's seen in his life up to that point. The idea that someone could be so selfish and so heartless to do that sort of thing just to save his own skin, he's not ready for that yet. He literally he can't understand it because it's just not it hasn't been introduced to his worldview yet. And I think it's kind of an understated moment for what must be a great revelation to him that like yeah, people really can be this evil because he kind of just like goes for it right away. He's like, "Oh man, well I guess if you say so, then I got to go stop it." I think this could have been a great opportunity to explore that aspect of his character. Like, there are some people out there who are really, really, really bad, not because they are like evil sociopaths, but because they want to save themselves and are not willing to stand up to do the right thing because they are afraid and are put into a position where they have to choose between doing the right thing and surviving. I don't know. I just feel like that's a little bit of a missed opportunity there. But also, a lot of what I just said is speculative, based on reasonable evidence, I think, but not like confirmed anywhere. So that's just my take. Oh, and August and Leaf decide that they're going to part ways because Leaf has to go deal with Manster, and August is like, "All right, yeah, I just wanted to help you get through the bandits." He gives him a tip about dismounting. Basically, he explains how dismounting works. You can't fit into the building with horses, so if you have a mounted unit, you have to dismount. That's just kind of explaining how that mechanic works. And then August, basically, as he's saying bye, August is like, "Be well, Prince of Leinster." And Leaf is like, "Wait a minute, this whole time you've known that I'm the Prince of Leinster?" And he's like, "Yeah, and I also want you back in power, so we'll meet again at some point and I'll continue to help you." Again, August dropping hints of like, "Oh, what's August up to? Why does he want Leaf back in power, etc., etc." Now, this map is pretty damn cool. Basically, the idea of this map is that you can just make a beeline for the boss and kill him and take the throne, but the side objective in this map is there are four kids in a jail cell inside the building, and if you rescue them and bring them back to their homes, then you'll be rewarded. Two of the houses will reward you immediately. One of them with a shield ring, and one of them with a scroll. We'll talk about the scroll in a minute, but two of them will reward you later down the line. One of them, I believe, lets you recruit a character in chapter 4. So I guess it's not really late. It's a little bit later down the line, but like in the very next chapter, basically. And then the other one gives you a warp staff in chapter at the end of chapter 7, um, which we'll talk about warp in actually very soon. We'll talk about it this chapter. But the idea is basically like you can make the decision. Okay, do I want to get these side objectives? Do I want to get all of them or just some of them? And how soon do I make a beeline for the boss? There's also a lot of anti-turtling incentives here. There's a sage in the back that after a good amount of time will unlock some treasure, which is obnoxious because first of all, he's stealing your shit. Like, give me my shit back. Um, because there are treasure chests in this map. This is the first time we're seeing treasure chests in this game. Actually, it's the first time we're seeing treasure chests in this podcast because there weren't any in FE4. But I mean, they're pretty standard stuff. You just go up with a thief or with someone who has a chest key, and you can open them up. But what makes this even harder is that if he gets his hand on the treasure that's inside there, it's a meteor tome. So he is programmed to, after a while, go into the room, take the meteor tome, and then use it. It's a long range attack to attack you from a distance. So he becomes pretty hard to deal with if you don't hurry. And then also there are some bandits that come in from the bottom left and try to get rid of the villages, meaning that you can't get the rewards from them anymore. Those guys are kind of annoying because they won't even suicide off your units. Most of the time, they'll just run past you and try to get to the houses as fast as possible. So you have to proactively kill them. Um, and there's a lot of them too. Like there is not a small. It's not like two or three. There's like 15 of the guys or something like that. It's not quite that many. It's like 10, I'd say. So you are definitely incentivized to hurry up here, and you might end up having to reset more than once, which is fine. Like it's not that long of a map. I like this map a lot actually. It really encourages you to put the pedal to the metal. But the enemies can be kind of tough. There's some armor knights. There are some mages that can hit pretty hard. So you have to like thread this needle of like going fast enough where you won't have to deal with the bandits or you won't have to deal with the meteor sage, but you do have to go slow enough where you're not going to get overwhelmed by enemies. You have to leave some people behind because no matter how fast you go, you're probably not going to avoid the bandits entirely. So you are going to have to put some guys down there to fight them off for a while. So you don't have your entire fighting force up north fighting the inside the building or outside the building. It's a good map. Okay, so we have two new characters to talk about. One of them is Lithis. Lithis is our first thief. Thieves in this game work pretty similarly to how they work in most games. You need a lockpick. They're the only ones you can use lockpicks. And they can open doors and chests. They can steal items, which is really fun and actually something that I enjoy training Lithus as like a combat unit for this reason, because if you get him to get a high build stat, then he will be able to steal more items. Essentially, you can steal any item in this game. Stealing works a little bit differently depending on the game. You can steal any item in this game, including weapons, tomes, stuff like that, as long as the weight of the item is less than Lithus's constitution. Now, most thieves have pretty mediocre constitution. We do get one later, like mid game, that has a decent con stat or build stat. But for the first half of the game or so, Lithus and later we get Lara are going to be your only thieves, and they both have pretty bad con. Lithus has okay con. The reason that this is fun is because most enemies only have one weapon, because they don't want you to be able to capture an enemy and get like an entire like platoon of weapons. So if Lithus has high enough build, he can just walk up to an enemy, steal their only weapon, and essentially kill them in one hit. Like remove them as a factor entirely, which is really fun, and I love doing it. That aside, like memes aside, he's a pretty standard thief. You know, he's got good utility. He can steal stuff. He can open chests and doors. You're gonna need him. You're gonna want him around for the most part, at least until you get the better thieves later on. But he can still be useful. I mean, and there's also nothing wrong with deploying more than one thief if that is something that you want to do. Especially later on, we get introduced to fatigue, which makes stuff like that a little bit more necessary. Lithus comes carrying a scroll. Scrolls are a unique mechanic in this game. Big surprise, there's like 20 unique mechanics in this game. But what it does is it if you're holding a scroll in your inventory, then you get a first of all, you're immune to all critical hits. You cannot be crit, which is really nice because a lot of enemies in this game have killer weapons. So you're facing a really real chance to get crit if you don't have a scroll on you. So keep that in mind because it's like the much more useful thing about scrolls than what they're actually more often known for. But the other thing that they do is that they give you buffs to your growth rates. This is actually something that we've seen before in FE3 Book 2. The Star Sphere shards increase your growth rates as well. In the remake, they just give you passive buffs to your stats, but in the original, they do buff your growth rates as well. So this isn't an entirely unique mechanic, but there's only 12 in the game, and all of them are based on one of the Crusaders, and all of them give you boosts to your growth rates that are like relevant to that particular Crusader. So like the said scroll gives you like a really high speed boost, stuff like that. This is what I was referring to earlier when I said that having bad growth rates is not relevant to your success in Thracia 776. Because even if you have bad growth rates, you can just slap scrolls on a character and they get like their growth rates just like skyrocket and you can get them to 20 across the board really easily. Scrolls do stack with each other, so if you give someone like 5 scrolls, they're gonna get all the growth buffs from all of those scrolls at the same time. Obviously, the crit nullification does not stack because you can't be 5 times immune to crits, but you know, you get some of them over the course of the game. You get 2 in this chapter, one from Lithus's inventory and then one from the village. I'm not going to go over all of them. You can look them up and see what they do for yourself, but I will say that the ones you get in this chapter aren't particularly good in terms of the growth rates that they buff. They're still good because of the crit nullification, but for the most part, it's not that important. Lithus as a character, I should mention, I've already talked enough about him, I think, but generally he's just kind of like a piece of shit. He's a scumbag, always kind of like in it for himself. But there's this implication of like, oh, maybe he's changed later on when you realize that he has not left, he's not betrayed you, he's sticking around. So a little bit of ambiguity there of like, oh, maybe he's not so bad after all. He has killed people, so I'm not gonna give him a complete free pass on that one. But there's some room for interpretation there of like, is he a changed man by the end of the game? Could be. Now we have the much more interesting unit to talk about, Safi. Safi is really, 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 really good. Best unit in the game? Yeah, I would say best unit in the game. We'll talk about her character first because it's pretty simple. She's kind of like shockingly naive. It's kind of a common trope for in this series for like characters, like cleric characters, to be naive and to like assume the best of people even when they don't deserve it. This is kind of like taking that to an extreme to the point where it's like kind of comical. Like Adine, right? Adine sees Do and Adine is like, okay, I'm gonna trust you not to steal anymore, and in exchange for that, I will help you escape from prison. And Dude's like, okay. And you can be like, oh well, it's kind of funny that you trusted this guy and then he immediately went back to doing the wrong thing. Du is also a child. Du is 14 years old, I want to say, or like 13, something like that. He's very young. So Adine saw this child in prison and was like, you're gonna like kill him and cut his tongue out or cut his tongue out for stealing something. He's a kid. Let's just get him out of here. Like there it's appealing to her sense of like justice and like forgiveness, right? Like she's like, you are still a child, you have a long life ahead of you. I don't want this to be like something that ruins your life, so I'm going to give you a second chance. And he doesn't take the second chance. He still steals stuff, although he is fighting on the side of good this time, so that's something, I guess. Lithis is, as far as I can tell, an adult man, um, and is not shows absolutely no signs of remorse. So either he's a really, really good actor, or Safi is like unbelievably naive. Like there's this terrible, terrible man that is renowned for his cruelty and sacking villages, not caring about people. In August, a man who has a history of like torturing people saw one of Lithus's lieutenants and was like, "Whoa, dude, you do not have to kill this many people." And that dude is working for Lithus. And Safi's like, "Okay, I just got to talk to him about how this is the right thing to do, and he'll come around and he'll fight on my side." And I think in that way, it like takes it like it's a really generic trope that is taken to such an extreme that it loops right back around to being memorable, I think, just because of how absurd it is that she would even humor the idea that he would make the right decision. Now, in terms of gameplay, Safi is incredibly good. Like I said, she's probably the best unit in the game. The reason for that is because stabs are unbelievably broken in Thracia 776. More so than any other game in the series. Although some games come close, especially the Arcanea games, like FE 1, 3, 11, and 12. Absolutely absurd. But Thracia takes the cake. A lot of the late game maps are bad, and I will come out and say that. Some of the late game maps are very, very bad. Some of the mid game maps are bad. There are side objectives that are like in weird, awkward spots of the map. There's sometimes characters who are like far away from a place they need to be. So what's the solution to this? Warp is the solution to this. Warp is infinite range in this game. This is not a unique thing. A lot of games have infinite range warp. Again, the Arcanea games, the original Shadow, not the original Shadows of Valentia, Gaiden, the original Gaiden. What makes this truly unique is that, first of all, the game gives you a ton of characters to use stabs. Like every magic unit can use stabs at some point, and some of them get access to A stabs very, very quickly. Safi gets access to A stabs incredibly quickly. She starts off at C, but she only needs to use like a few stabs to hit B, and then as soon as she promotes, she goes up to A. So you can get her to A stabs incredibly quickly. She's going to be the first unit you have access to who can warp, which is very good. You get a ton of warp staves in this game. A lot of warp staves. Like probably a dozen, maybe more, depending on how many you're willing to steal from like characters. A lot of them are side objectives, but some of them you can capture off of enemy priests and stuff like that. So you have no shortage of the amount of warp staves you can use. So the fact that Safi is like the easiest person to get to warp rank is really, really nice. The other thing that makes Safi incredibly good is the Hammern staff. This is the most interesting that Hammern has ever been in this series. Hammern is a staff that fully repairs one item in your inventory. It can be a weapon or it can be a staff. Now, this is a pretty common item in the series. I wouldn't say it's like everywhere, but it's in a handful of games. It's in I want to say all of the GBA games. It's in both Tellius games. It's in the Arcanea games, I'm pretty sure. So it's in more games than it's not in, I think. But in most games, there are only like a couple of items that you even like want to repair anyway. It's like some really, really good personal items, maybe a warp staff if you have a warp staff. Most of the time you're going to use in like the GBA games, you're probably going to use the hammer, like all three uses of the hammer on the warp staff that you get because warp is so good and you only get one, so you have to like stretch it for all it's worth. But maybe you want to use it on like Regin Leaf in FE8 or you want to use it on like one of the legendary weapons so you can use it more in FE6. But for the most part, it's really only like a couple things that you're going to use it on. Hammern in this game is incredibly interesting because there are so many items that you want to repair. Every personal weapon is incredibly good. You got Leaf's Lightbrand, you got the Brave Lance, you got later on we get the Thief Staff from Tina, which is incredible. The Pooji Axe is something you're gonna want to repair. Really good non-personal items. The Brave Axe is gonna get used a lot. Another personal weapon is the Graph Caliber, which you're going to see in Chapter 4X. Some of these you might want to repair more than once because you're going to use the Brave Axe and the Pooji like a ton over the course of the game. You might legitimately want to repair them multiple times. And then, of course, you get a lot of warp staffs, but you might miss some of them. And as a result, you might say, okay, well, I'm going to repair a warp staff. And you might want to repair more than one warp staff. So there are so many good items, and there's only 5 uses of the hammer to go around the entire game. So you have to be really strategic about what items you want to repair. And it's really a matter of like personal preference, what you value more and which characters you're using more often. The Brave Axe is probably going to be one that you do because a lot of characters can use it, so it's going to receive a lot of damage. The Light Brand is good, but after a while, you probably aren't going to use it as often anymore. So it's maybe like lower priority on the list. But if you like using Leaf, if you like using the main character and you use Leaf a lot, then yeah, you're probably going to use the Light Brand a ton. So you might want to repair that. It's down to your own personal play style, and I really like that. And I kind of lost the thread a little bit, but the reason I was bringing this up now is because Safi has it in her inventory, and she is the only character who can use it over the entire game. She is incredibly valuable, both as being your first warp bot and also for giving you access to the incredibly powerful hammer and staff. I would say she's the best unit in the game. I think the majority of people agree because being good at combat is not a unique commodity in Thracia. Everyone's good at combat, and everyone who isn't good at combat can be very easily made into combat juggernauts. But only one character can use the hammer and staff, and only one character can get to A rank staves as fast and as easily as Safi can, and it's Safi. So she has a really unique utility that no one else has, which is just not true of characters like Finn or Dagdar or even characters like Asvel, who do have a niche and are really are like one of the few characters that can set themselves apart in the combat department. Safi is arguably even better than him because she's just like she does something that no one else can do. She does 2 things that no one else can do. And that's very, very rare in Thracia. So I've already explained the premise of this map and why I like it, why I think it's a good map. So I'm not going to go over it again. What I will say is that now that we have Safi, there's going to be another mechanic that you've probably noticed at some point or another. If not here, then maybe when you get Nana later. But it happened to me here. There's a very good chance that one of your characters is going to get injured fighting the guards outside of the building. There are a lot of them, and some of them can pack quite a punch. So you want to get healed at some point. And thankfully, you have your new shiny healer in the form of Safi. So you go up with Safi, and you go to heal someone, and your staff misses. And you're like, huh, that's weird. I didn't know it could do that. Staves being able to miss is, in my opinion, the worst mechanic that Thracia introduced. This is similar, not identical, but similar to the 1 to 99 hit cap issue, where it's much more of a problem in theory than it is in practice. However, it is a lot more of a problem in practice than that one was, and in theory is so much worse that I think it is 10 times as egregious. Let me explain exactly how the mechanic works, because the game doesn't do a good job of explaining that. Staves have hit rates in this game. Not just status staves, but like regular healing staves. Hit rate is 60 plus the healer's skill times 4. So for example, if I don't remember what Safi's base skill is. Let me check. Okay, so Safi's base skill is 6. So the hit rate would be 60 times 6 times 4, which is 24. So the hit rate is 84. So every time she heals, there is a 16% chance that she will miss. That is not like super high or anything like that, but it's a very real possibility, right? It's not inconceivable, and that is a problem. This is not like the 99% hit issue. In that instance, again, like I said earlier, you almost never have a 100% chance to hit anyway. So in the rare instances that it would have been 100%, but it's only 99% because of the game, and you also miss because of that, are extremely rare. Meanwhile, in a map where you're going to get hit a lot, in a game where you're going to get hit a lot, and you have a 16% chance to miss every time you heal, that is not a small number. On average, that is every 10 times that Safi heals, she misses twice if you round up. That is unacceptable. And I don't understand how this was like thought to be an okay mechanic to add into the game. Again, it's not something that's going to happen all the time. It's uncommon enough where most players are going to like experience an inconvenience every once in a while, but it's not going to be like game breaking. However, there is a reasonable chance, I would say like a pretty high chance over the course of the game, that a player will heal someone and it will miss, and as a result, that character will die. And depending on who it was, that might be a map reset. Depending on the map, that could be potentially half an hour of wasted time because of a mechanic that was introduced to like add unpredictability for some fucking reason. I don't get it. I don't understand what the appeal of this is, right? Like if the idea is, oh, you need to be prepared for contingency plans. Healing is your contingency plan. If a plan breaks bad, healing is your like result, is like your opportunity to recover from that. So if you make a bad decision, your punishment is that you need to like take time to heal. If healing can also be punished, then you're just going to get screwed over for no reason. And it's really unfair. And I don't understand how this was like thought to be, okay, yeah, this is fine. We're cool with this. It's a really dumb mechanic that is going to screw someone over at some point. I'm sure it's screwed plenty of people over. Like most of the time it's just going to be annoying, right? Like, oh no, I missed my mend, so I'm going to have to take an extra turn to heal, right? And it's also mitigated by the fact that after your healer hits 10 skill, it can never happen again. Once the healer is at 10 skill, they're never going to miss another staff. So I think that's why people are more willing to sweep this under the rug. Like, okay, yeah, it's a little bit annoying in the early game, but Safi has a 45% skill growth. She'll level it up by the time, and it's like a plus, is that +1 skill? Yeah. So she'll level it up within like 7-ish levels, roughly, plus a promotion. On average, by the time she's promoted, she should have 10 skill. And she can promote very quickly and very easily. So it's not going to be a problem for Safi very often. It's probably not going to be a problem very often for like Sleuth. What's Sleuth's? Yeah, Sleuth's base skill is 12, so he's never going to have to deal with it. Um, Salem, let's see. Salem's is 6, but he has the same skill growth, and he actually gets +2 skill on promotion. The real character that gets screwed over by this more than anyone else is Tina, who I spelled her name wrong. Let's see. I thought it was Teena, but I guess they changed it to just like normal Tina. Yeah, she has 1 skill and a 25% growth, so she's going to miss stabs more often than anyone else. But she's in a little bit of a unique situation where most of her stabs are like, you're not going to be using her to heal very often anyway. What I'm trying to say is, I know that it's not going to be a big deal for the majority of players, but it is such a poorly conceived mechanic that I conceptually disagree with so strongly. And the odds of it screwing someone over are like not unreasonable, I don't think. Like it's not out of the realm of possibility. That I just feel like this was not worth it. Like this idea of like, oh, and again, I'm speculating. Maybe this isn't why Kaga did it, but I can't think of any other reason. This idea of we want to make it unpredictable. We want to make them think on their feet, and we want the player to have to deal with contingency plans and create backup strategies. So when things inevitably go wrong, they have to strategize to get themselves out of a bad situation. I agree with that, and I like that idea, but I feel like healing is kind of like this sacred cow that you shouldn't touch because that is your contingency plan. If you put a risk like there, that's like if you're at a circus and the trapeze artist is doing flips and shit, and you cut a hole into the safety net. It's not a very big hole, but if they land in it just right, then they die. That's what this feels like, right? Like healing is supposed to be there as a last resort. Like, okay, we fucked up. We need to get ourselves out of the situation. Let me heal this guy so he doesn't die. And it's like, well, get fucked, I guess, because you just missed. That's really how I feel strongly that this was a bad decision and that it should not come back in any later Fire Emblem game. All right, after slogging through this map, I say slogging, but I really like this map. After getting through this map and capturing the throne, Leaf is like, finally, we captured the gate. This is great. Now we're going to move on to Manster. Unfortunately, Raedric has woken up from his nap, and he's holding Nana at gunpoint essentially, and saying, "You need to come with me, or I'm going to kill Nana." And Leaf, left with no other choice, lays down his arms, tells all of his soldiers to get out of there, but he himself has been captured. Abel actually offers to go along with him. She lets herself get captured as well in order to make sure that Leaf is not alone and has someone there to help defend him. Everyone else though manages to escape. A lot of characters have a little bit of a blurb here. Avel, Finn, Orson, Halvin, Safi, and Dagdar. Most of them are pretty unremarkable. I feel bad for Finn because he's been like with Leaf protecting him his whole life, and this separation must be causing him a lot of grief. Although the actual quote that he says isn't anything particularly noteworthy. Dagdar's, though, is great because he basically says he's going to go get his whole bandit crew and storm Manster and take Leaf back, which is fucking awesome. He doesn't do it because we'll see later why that doesn't pan out. But yeah, so Leaf has been captured, and so has Avel, and so has Lithis, actually, which is kind of like Lithis gets captured too for some reason. I don't know why. A little bit before I ended this map, I swapped around some items. Essentially, we're going to be doing that thing that happens in a lot of games where you get captured and your inventory is like put in a chest somewhere, and you have to go find it. The less items or the fewer items that you have, the easier this next stage of the game will be. But you also want to bring items that are going to be useful. So I brought Leaf's Lightbrand. I brought like the Brave Axe and the like an Armor Slayer or something because there's a lot of tough sword wielding enemies or a lot of tough armored enemies coming up in the next few maps. So I figured that would be a good thing to bring. But I'm pretty sure that's it. Maybe like a couple others. I gave Leaf all my stat boosters. And that is it. That is the last chapter that we're talking about today. Kind of leaving on a little bit of a cliffhanger of like, oh man, what's going to happen to Leaf and Lithus and Avil? But we'll see them all next time and see how they're getting along. But for right now, though, I want to talk about the game so far and what I've thought of it. This game starts off pretty strong in terms of its map design. I hate 2X. I think 2X is fucking miserable. But in terms of like the Fog of War maps, it's actually probably the best one, which is to say it's like manageable in how awful it is. The other three are actually all pretty good for like standard early game maps. They do a good job of teaching you the mechanics. They take good advantage of terrain. They have interesting side objectives and anti-turtling incentives. Really good stuff. This game starts off on the right foot. One of the strongest early games in the entire series, I would say. In terms of like the first 3 or 4 maps. This game is really, really solid across the board. It's going to change very quickly because I don't like Manster, but we'll get there when we get there. So, in terms of our map gauntlet, this is the first time that we are actually going to have to decide what is the best map that we played this episode. I almost said week again. Jesus Christ. In the last game, we only played 1 chapter per episode, so we didn't have to make this decision. But now that we're playing multiple per episode, we do have to talk about which is the best out of the ones that we played. It's going to be anywhere between 3 and 5 most episodes, I want to say. Um, so out of the 3 to 5 that we played, which one is the best? This episode, I'm really torn between chapter 2 and chapter 3. I'm not really torn, but like those are the 2 contenders. In the end, I think that the best is definitely chapter 3. Chapter 2 does a really good job of softly teaching you about terrain and about choke points in a way that um, I really enjoyed. It encourages you to position yourself strategically and to take advantage of the landscape, and that's awesome and that's great. Chapter 3 doesn't do that as much, but it does have a great anti-turtling incentive in the form of those villages, those bandits, and of course that annoying meteor sage that you have to deal with. It forces you to play risky, which is great, because if you optimize every strategy, then you would never have a chance of dying, but you'd also end up just kind of going really slowly and having not as good of a time overall. So the fact that this map encourages you to like kind of push yourself a little bit, put yourself in those dangerous positions, and hope that your strategies work out, take those risks, is great. So chapter 3 is definitely my favorite out of the 4 that we played this time. And of course, since it's the first episode of Thracia, we're not comparing it to anything. Remember that we are starting fresh every game. So chapter 3 won last time, but we're not comparing this to chapter 3. We're going to compare the next game or the next chapter that wins to this. So we'll see how that goes. Now, despite the fact that it's been a really long time since I put out an episode, there isn't really a whole lot going on in terms of news. It's all hero stuff. There is one thing that's still relevant though. It's like a horror themed fanzine, which I don't know what a fanzine is, but I'm pretty sure it's like a magazine that is like an art, kind of like an art book. Um, and it's like horror and Halloween themed. It's based around Fates and Awakening specifically. So and it's got some cool stuff. I looked through it and it's got some really neat art and stuff in there. So if that sort of thing interests you, I highly recommend checking that out. There's also some kind of raffle going on, um, having to do with Raina Strober, who is the voice actor for Azura in Fates and her other appearances. Although that is ending at the time I'm recording this tomorrow, and I don't know if I'll be able to get this out in one day. I might be able to, I don't know. But if you have a chance, I would look into it. The pre-orders for the fanzine itself are going until the 24th. So you have time for that. It's just the Raina Strober thing is ending tomorrow, it seems like. Although I'm not entirely sure, because it says Saturday, September 20th, which tomorrow is September 20th, but tomorrow is a Monday. So now I've done a lot over the past month. I've watched a lot of shows, I've watched a lot of anime, and played a lot of games. And I don't remember all of them, to be quite honest. So I'm going to try to narrow it down to like the highlights. I played The Somnium Files, which is a visual novel made by the same company that made the Zero Escape series. So 999, Virtue's Last Reward, and Zero Time Dilemma, which are relatively popular. You might have heard of them, you might not have, I don't know. Um, I would, first of all, I would highly, highly recommend checking out Zero Time Dilemma, or not Zero Time Dilemma specifically, but the Zero Escape trilogy. It is an incredible series of games, and some of my favorites of all time. The Somnium Files, had a lot to live up to, if that wasn't clear, because like those games are some of my favorites ever created. So it didn't quite hit that same level, in my opinion, of quality, but it was still quite good. It was really well made, looks amazing, sounds amazing. The voice work is incredible. The story is really interesting and neat. Plays around with some cool sci-fi concepts. So check it out for sure. The other thing I've been doing a lot of is watching House MD, which is not an anime. It is a live action. Uh, I'd call it like a comedy. Uh, it's a comedy for sure, but it's hard to explain. It's about a doctor who works in a hospital that runs into all these incredibly rare diseases. And every time like a new patient comes in, they have to be like, okay, well, what's wrong with her? And they run through all these ideas, and then they're always wrong until they get to the end and they figure it out. And they're able to cure her or him. Although sometimes it gets really sad because they find it out and then they look really dejected, and someone's like, "What's wrong?" And it's like it's terminal. Like it's the it's a hospital show through and through, right? Like there's that tragedy of like you can't save them all. The main character House is like super funny. I mean, there are some jokes and ideas that did not age well. Like for example, he constantly sexually harasses his coworkers like all the time. It's like every episode there's at least like 6 or 7 jokes about him sexually harassing women, which is not great, but um, other parts of his personality are all pretty cool, and fun and entertaining to watch for the most part. He's just an asshole. He hates everyone around him. I don't know. It's a really good show. I would very, very highly recommend it. I also watched Invincible, which is not even remotely similar, so I don't know why I mentioned it like it is, but it's a superhero. I mean, everyone knows Invincible at this point. It's the one with the think Mark think meme. So everyone kind of knows at least generally what that's about. Incredible. If you haven't checked it out, I would for sure. And then the other thing I've been doing is I've been doing a lot of Pokemon Nuzlocke. I beat Shield, hardcore Nuzlocke. I beat Shield. I beat White, and now I'm working on Fire Red. I'm trying to get through the whole series, or at least most of the series, and then I want to go try some of the like the more difficult ROM hacks. So wish me luck with that. And then yeah, I mean there's other stuff too, but I don't remember any of it, so that's gonna have to do it for right now. I didn't mention at the top of the episode. I did not mention my question of the episode, and that's because for 2 reasons. First of all, I already had plenty to talk about since we're introducing a new game, but also no one responded to the last which is a shame. I got a few responses on the first time around, so I thought that I might get a few this time as well. But unfortunately, no one responded to that prompt, which is a bummer. And that's okay though. I'm comfortable talking. Like what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna like any time that I don't get any response to these questions, I'm just gonna talk about them with my friends, and we're gonna talk about like the discussion that we had because that's also interesting to me. So that's not like I don't mind not getting response, but I think it would be more interesting if I heard from you guys about some of the things that you have to say about these prompts. So I'm gonna try again. This time around, I'm going to ask you guys because we introduced my least favorite game in the series today. I want to know what your guys' least favorite game in the series is and why. So let me know. You can email me at turnwheelpodcast@gmail.com, or you can tweet at I made Melee Kirby with your responses, and I will wait with bated breath to see if you guys have anything to say. But again, otherwise, I'll find something else to fill the time. Don't worry about it if you don't feel like answering. That's totally fine. Okay, so thank you for sticking to the end of this incredibly long episode. Probably the longest episode so far, although there is a lot of dead air that I'm going to have to cut out. Most of the time they aren't going to be like this. This had a lot of introducing concepts and mechanics that isn't going to be a problem in the future. So I don't anticipate every episode being this long, but it is going to be a chunker even when I get it slimmed down. So thank you again if you managed to stick it out all the way through. and I appreciate your listening. Next time, we're going to be tackling chapters 4, 4X, 5, and 6. So not the entire Manster arc, but most of it. Manster goes up to chapter 7. We're stopping at chapter 6. So with that, I'm pretty sure that's all I have to say. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you next time. Bye-bye.